Supercard system. In a world where humans and monsters relied on mystical fruits and their inner power to fight for dominance, a lost soul was thrown, given the powers from all the other worlds, he's known. But there was a catch, he had no control over what power he would get. With knowledge beyond that of most, he sails his path to the top of the One Piece world. Chapter 1, Big Brother. The beach under the sunshine has an enchanting charm. The seawater gently rushed up the beach, then slowly receded, leaving wet traces and some small aquatic creatures, clattering rhythmically, sounding so pleasant. Ian stood on the beach and waited for a while, and finally, he saw a dark shadow coming from the horizon and blew a whistle. After the black shadow heard the whistle, he immediately turned and flew toward his position. When it was close, it turned out to be a seagull. A strange seagull. It was very large, with a seaman's hat on its head and a backpack hanging from its neck. When Ian saw him landing on the beach, he went up, took out a coin, handed it to him, and said, "Give me a newspaper." However, when the seagull saw 50 on the coin, he shook his head in a distressed manner, and took a piece of paper from his backpack with a pointed beak, on which was a large number, 80. "The price has risen again?" Ian stared at the seagull with squinting eyes and said with anger, "Isn't it just been up last week? Why is it going up again this time?" "Q." The seagull uttered a cry, scratched its head with its wings, and looked helpless, meaning that it could not help it. All right, here you are. 80 berries. Next time if the price goes up again, I'm not going to patronize you anymore." Ian painfully took out 3 coins of 10 berries from his pocket and handed them to him. After the money was paid, he pecked out a newspaper from his backpack and gave it to Ian. The seagull flapped its wings and flew away. Ian opened the newspaper and read it while he was going back. He saw a massive headline on the newspaper. "The Red Hair Shanks." Ian sighed, "The 4 Emperors. There is no doubt that this is the world of One Piece. It's been 3 months since Ian came to this world." Once again, Ian determined that he was in that world, he didn't know whether to feel sad or happy. Ian's original name was Yi, and he was originally a good young man from the earth, but unfortunately, when he was shopping, he passed through a KFC, which he often visited. It was exactly 12 o'clock, on a whim, he took out his mobile phone, stood outside the store, and he opened a game on his phone, and he was about to upgrade his physical strength. But at that time, the big sign outside the KFC shop suddenly fell down on his head. He thought that he must have died because when he woke up again, he found himself in a strange place and attached to a 10-year-old boy named Ian. At first, he didn't figure out where he was. It was just a remote village, and the information was blocked. But when he heard the words Roger the Pirate King coming out from his master's mouth, he was confused. Only then did he realize that he had come to the world of One Piece, and he was in Frost Moon Village in the East Blue. It never occurred to him that he could cross through to this world, even though he was a One Piece fan, but he still felt a little incredulous that such a thing had happened to him. While thinking about what happened to him and walking towards the village, Ian came to a dojo outside, where a middle-aged man with round glasses, long black hair and ponytail, and a gentle face, harmless smile, was waiting for him. "Sensei." When Ian saw the middle-aged man, he quickly quickened his pace and shouted, "This is the newspaper of this week." This middle-aged man is Ian's master, Koshiro. As an orphan, Ian was adopted by Koshiro and learned kendo in the dojo. Koshiro took the newspaper and rubbed it on Ian's head. He smiled and said, "You have worked hard." It was supposed to be an intimate move, his current body is a small child, but he has a mind of an adult. Where can he stand such a move? So he felt very awkward. Fortunately, Master Koshiro did not notice his strangeness. While looking at the newspaper, he walked to the dojo, and Ian followed him and went inside. Red Hair Pirates? What are they doing in the East Blue? After reading the news, Koshiro looked a little worried. Ian couldn't help but grin. He knew what Koshiro was worried about. Although the Red Hair Shanks was a good person in the anime, but he still had the name of pirate. Master Koshiro was worried about the presence of pirates here. There was no reason for him. But Ian knew that Shanks appeared in the East Blue, but he just stayed in Windmill Town for a short time, and would not come to the Frost Moon Village. So, the master's worry is unnecessary. Windmill Town. Ian could not help recalling that it was Luffy's town, isn't it? Where will the Red Hair Shanks meet Luffy? While he kept thinking of it, Koshiro patted on his head and said. Ian, what are you thinking about? Time is up, tell your brothers to practice together. All right. Ian responded dejectedly. If you want to say what is the most upsetting thing for Ian of crossing to this world, it was undoubtedly a practice of swinging swords in the dojo for a fixed period of time. For no reason, can you imagine practicing swordsmanship with a group of children with runny noses and silly toothless smiles in neat rows? That's a silly feeling. Soon, all the disciples in the dojo were summoned together, standing in 2 rows on the left and right sides, holding bamboo swords in their hands, waiting for the beginning of the practice. The children who came to train are all from Frost Moon Village, and all are boys. Ian looked forward and saw the opposite row, a kid fat and short looking back at him with thick bottle glasses. Every time he sees him, Ian would think that this guy's eyes position was actually 2 circles. Beside him, there was a bald boy with a runny nose, sniffing and sucking repeatedly. In the middle, another kid with weird hairstyle looked like Frisia in his second form. All of them looks like melons and jujubes. They were so tragic that Ian didn't dare to look at them anymore. He didn't know how Master Koshiro accepted them as apprentices. Fortunately, in this tragic picture, there was only one bright spot, which was a girl, that standing in the opposite row on the first place, Kuina. Kuina, the daughter of Mr. Koshiro, has big dark brown eyes, short dark blue hair, and a man's clothes. She has a stubborn and fierce momentum. Among a group of little fart children, she seems to stand out from the crowd. As Ian looked back, Kuina looked right over. Although she didn't speak, she smiled at Ian, making him seems to hear her voice saying, "Big brother Ian." As an orphan adopted by Master Koshiro, Ian was a little older than Kuina. In the dojo, she was the strongest, and even Ian could not beat her. But even so, she always called Ian big brother. So even if Ian did beat her, he still wouldn't be arrogant. Despite her stubbornness, Kuina has always been a well-educated child. Master Koshiro's voice came to his ear, and the sword practice began. Ian put his mind back and began to wave his bamboo sword with Koshiro's command. Chop. Back. Chop. Back. Ian practiced swordsmanship very seriously, and with the waving of the bamboo sword in his hand, there was a continuous sound in his mind. You have done a sword swinging exercise. Basic swordsmanship proficiency +1. You have done a sword swinging exercise. Basic swordsmanship proficiency +1. You have done a sword swinging exercise. Basic swordsmanship proficiency +1. You have done a sword swinging exercise. Basic swordsmanship proficiency +1. When he knew that he was in One Piece world, Ian's blood was boiling for the battle among the characters, and his tears almost fell down for the feeling of being between the protagonists. But if we leave these things aside, the world of One Piece is full of darkness and cruelty, and Ian's physical strength is not high. Although he has been training kendo for many years with Koshiro-sensei, he has not made any progress. If it keeps going like this, Ian is thinking, or else it's better to live peacefully in Frost Moon Village. Fortunately, when Ian came to this world, and for the first practice of swordsmanship, Ian found something in his mind. Perhaps the reason for this was that he got smashed while he was opening the game. Ian found that the game he played was engraved in his soul and came to the world with him. It's funny, this mobile game is a messy game downloaded by Ian. It's a typical copy version of the mobile game. This mobile game is a card game. The player has a protagonist role, and at the same time, he can also assemble his own team by drawing cards and fight. The cards come from various animations and games, and all the characters are there. There is a feeling of chaos. Ian saw a lot of familiar characters in this game. This is a little fun to play, but unexpectedly after the game mutated, it became the cost of self-reliance. Chapter 2, Naughty Kid. Name, Ian. Level, 1. Doriki, Power Level 7. Strength, 5. Speed, 5. Vitality, 10. Nen, Mind Force 0. Skills, Basic Swordsmanship Proficiency, 23014/100000. Card, None. This is what Ian saw in his mind, his own attribute, and it took him a long time to understand the role of this attribute. It seems that some changes have taken place in the game system. In the original game used to measure the strength of the game is the combat power, but now it has become the value of Doriki, which is exactly the same as the measurement standard in the world of One Piece. According to Ian's memory, the Doriki value of 10 is the standard of an ordinary marine soldier, but now he has only 7, which seems to be a little better than the farmer with a shotgun from Dragon Ball Z who has only 5 power level. It is estimated that this is the reason for practicing kendo all year round. The value of vitality should be the amount of damage that you can bear. Needless to say, once it returns to 0, he will die, and the last one is more interesting. When he used to watch the anime before, he always wondered how the abilities of the Thunder God Enel could be displayed. Or on what it's based. Enel Road's abilities, Mamoragan, Lightning Dragon, and 1 billion volt. That supernatural phenomenon can't be summarized as a simple devil fruit, but now when Ian sees the value of the energy, it's a bit stunning. That should be the embodiment of the Nin, which is endowed by the devil fruit, but it is only a certain ability, and this ability can become stronger with the exercise, including the haki should also belong to the use of mind force. Therefore, there's nothing called a strong or weak devil fruit, the only difference is practicing, and some people who have not eaten the devil fruit, such as Mihawk and Shanks, can rely on their haki. All these are just their strong Nin capability. Now Ian has a mindful of the Nin, but its value was 0, which means that his Nin ability is in an unopened state, and he has no idea how to get it. His only skill at that moment was basic swordsmanship. At present, he still doesn't know what the basic swordsmanship is good for. He can only practice it step by step. So even for these 3 months, his proficiency is only over 20,000 points. He was afraid that it would take 100,000 points to see the change. As for the cards, Ian was even speechless. He was able to find the card store in the system, but it was tragically, he discovered that he could not extract the cards. It was a money matter. It costs a lot of money. It takes 500 diamonds to extract a card, but it takes 100,000 berries to recharge them for 500 diamonds, which is 200:1. It was the first time that Ian had seen such an outrageous recharge. Unfortunately, his allowance is only 500 berries a month given by Master Koshiro. There's nothing to spend in this small village. Apart from buying newspapers and so on, he is saving as much as he can, but it's still a long way from 100,000 berries. This way of asking for money is consistent with the original game. In other words, if you don't have money, you still can play it, but if you want to play well, you must be very wealthy. It's a pay-to-win kind of a game. If this is the only way, then it won't be easy for Ian to save enough money to draw a card, but fortunately, anyone who has played this kind of card game knows that he can pull a free card from time to time. In the store, there is a countdown in the draw card option, which is usually 48-hour countdown in the past, but now it has turned into 100 days. When he saw the countdown, Ian almost collapsed. Is the system forcing me to charge money or what? It's good to have a system, but it's depressing if you can't use it for a long time. So since that time, Ian has been living in with ignorant. Fortunately, time is still a good mix. 3 months later, the time to draw a card for the first time is getting closer and closer, which makes Ian look forward to it. Since he came to this world, he would like to go around and appreciate this strange world, but in order to get out of this small village, he must become stronger. In this world, only the strong have a stage. Sword exercise, a total of 500 swings. When he finished the Master Koshiro's training, Ian was already panting. He has been doing exercises very seriously, and every time he chopped, he used all strength, so his physical strength was naturally consumed very quickly. After all, he has a body of a 10-year-old boy. 500 times of sword training brought him about 500 points of basic sword skill proficiency. When Ian was watching the progress of proficiency in his mind, he suddenly heard Koshiro's voice. The following is the battle practice, Ian, Kuina. You two come first. When Ian heard it, suddenly he felt numb. Why did we come again? He did not know what Koshiro has thought of. For these 3 months, Koshiro found that Ian's practice had become more severe than before, so he wanted to test how much progress Ian had made. The way to test is the battle practice, but the problem was that Kuina is much better than Ian. Every time Ian fights with her, she beats the hell out of him. When Ian is beaten like that by his sister, he feels very shameless. Like Kuina, Ian was also very clean and tidy. They were different from the snotty dirty children in the dojo, so Kuina was very happy to practice with Ian. But once she becomes an opponent, she transforms into a heartless monster. Although she is a girl, she has a stronger character than some boys. Every time she fights with Ian, she goes with all her strength. Standing up hardly, he held the bamboo sword with both hands, and the tip of the sword slanted upwards, crossed the bamboo sword of Kuina, and waited for the signal. When Koshiro told them to start the battle, Sentu Kaishi, Kuina immediately shouted, took back her sword with both hands, raised it high, and chopped it towards Ian at a very fast speed. Ian's sword crossed her sword and blocked it, but the result was a tremendous force on the bamboo sword, shaking his both hands. Before he could get the control of his bamboo sword back, Kuina's next blow came. Kuina's kendo skills were classified as the best in the dojo. Her sword was used freely, strong and fast. Every time she found a good opportunity on Ian's side, she immediately attacks him. In just half a minute, the two have been colliding for dozens of times, each time Ian was struggling hard to resist, and couldn't make a counter-attack at all. Ha! Kuina became more and more brave. Suddenly, a straight stab struck Ian's wrist directly. Then her bamboo sword swung fiercely and the sword in Ian's hand flew away. Damn it, lost again. Ian was somewhat discouraged. However, Kuina said happily to Ian, "Brother Ian, your recent progress is very obvious. You're much better than before. You are just comforting me." Ian rolled his eyes and rubbed his wrist, where Kuina hit him. "It still hurts?" "Kuina is right." Master Koshiro, with a harmless smile on his face, opened his mouth and said, "Ian, you have really improved a lot." As Master Koshiro that, the other children in the dojo immediately at Ian with adoration. In their opinion, it was really good to battle with Kuina for so long. If they were replaced by him, they might be defeated in a moment. When Ian saw the adoring eyes of these little farts, he felt kind-hearted. He would rather not have such adoration. Just then, a loud voice suddenly came from outside the dojo. "Anyone here? Anybody here? I am a Dajayaburari. Dajayaburari is someone that challenge a dojo. The strongest guy come out and battle me." Ian's heart moved and looked toward the door. A child with a leaf in his mouth and his hands were on his chest, he was standing at the entrance of the dojo. The sun was shining behind him, giving a glimpse of his messy green hair and his protruding eyebrows. He just stood there with a stupid look that was so arrogant. Murimo, green algae head, Rorino Zoro. At first glance, Ian recognized him and felt a trance in his mind. Although Ian had been preparing for this moment from when he knew that this village was called Frost Moon Village, his master was named Koshiro and his sister was named Kuina, Ian still felt unreal when he saw Zoro really appear in front of him. Strangely, when Ian saw Zoro, he did not think of this great guy, who was so aggressive, cool and one of the worst generation, but he was looking at Kuina with a wild jump in his heart. The appearance of Zoro means that Kuina will die soon. His own sister, is she going to die? Ian was in a chaotic mood. Although he had just get defeated by Kuina and almost staged the beaten tragedy again, he asked in his heart. Can he really watch Kuina die in front of his eyes? This is not an anime character, this is a person who lives in front of him. For the children of Koshiro's dojo, Kuina was their goddess, including Ian. Kuina's masculinity, but this is her unique beauty. Although she has no mercy in dealing with anyone, she will care for every injured person afterward, medicate them and comfort them, just like a lovely sister. After 3 months of getting along, Ian has an unspeakable affection for her, so for a while, his look at Zoro became complicated. Although Kuina's death has nothing to do with Zoro, she died unexpectedly, but it is undeniable that the appearance of Zoro means that Kuina's death is near. This made Ian have no idea how to face Zoro. No one noticed Ian's complicated mood. After hearing Zoro's announcement of the smashing ceremony, Master Koshiro gave a hearty laugh. He got up and went to the door. He looked at Zoro with a smile and said, "It's pretty rare to see a Dajayaburari these days." Zoro took up his hands and said proudly, "Don't underestimate me just because I'm a kid. I'm undefeated in all of nearby towns." "Well, then, I have to accept your challenge." Master Koshiro smiled. "If I win, I'll take your signboard," Zoro said. Koshiro smiled and asked him, "What if you lost?" "Lose? If that happens, let's see, I'll join this place." Hearing Zoro's reply, Koshiro laughed again. "That's settled, then Ian." When he heard Master Koshiro calling his name, Ian was refreshed, but immediately fell into surprise. "Hey, what? Shouldn't Kuina fight him?" How did it turn into calling me? Chapter 3, I don't fight with idiots. What kind of joke is this, telling me to fight against Zoro? Ian just felt that very dissatisfied, this plot is not right. Although Ian knows that, the current Zoro wasn't a real swordsman. The so-called battle is just a kind of children fighting. If he does it himself, he can beat him with a simple swing of a sword, but that wasn't the problem. If he beats Zoro, then how could the sparkle of the relationship between Zoro and Kuina appear? Without Kuina, how could Zoro become stronger without losing to her? The difference between losing to a boy and losing to a girl is completely different. Ian knew that it wasn't the right time to battle with Zoro, so he shook his head and said, I won't fight him. Koshiro looked at Ian strangely and didn't understand what he was thinking, but he didn't say anything. Since Ian refused, Koshiro called Kuina. Kuina was obedient, and when she heard Koshiro's voice, she stood up and said, Yes, Odo-san. As soon as Zoro saw Kuina, he got angry and shouted at Koshiro, What? Aren't you coming to be my opponent? Koshiro laughed and said, Kuina is a girl, but she is more powerful than adults in this dojo. Zoro looked gloomily at Kuina for a while and finally said, I see, okay then. So, please come inside. Koshiro finished, turned, and walked in. Zoro and Kuina followed Koshiro into the dojo. Because they heard that Zoro came to battle in the dojo, Ian and all the other disciples of Koshiro had sat cross-legged in the dojo. Besides Ian, other kids looked at Zoro's eyes, both curious and indignant. Zoro was so stinky at this time, but Master Koshiro had no other choice, allowing his battle for the dojo request, and he did not know what he thought. In the corner of the dojo, there was a barrel with bamboo swords, and Koshiro pointed to the barrel and said to Zoro, choose a weapon. You can use anyone. Really? Zoro spat out the leaves in his mouth, went over and held out a large bamboo sword. Then, the kid held 3 swords in his left hand, 3 in his right hand, and 3 in his mouth. He was ready, and the people in the dojo looked at him with shocked eyes. When Koshiro came to the altar, Zoro saluted to him, but when he bowed his head, a bamboo sword fell from his mouth, and when he and Kuina saluted each other, another sword fell down. But this kid's expression was still serious. What is he doing? This fellow is like a fool. The pupils in the dojo looked at him like an idiot. Ian also saw a burst of silence, emotional green algae head of the dumb title, since childhood. After the salute, the duel between Zoro and Kuina began, but without any suspense, Zoro was defeated very quickly. Kuina's first chop directly made Zoro resist with only 2 bamboo swords, and then the second chop with great vigor completely knocked down all the bamboo swords in Zoro's hands. Da-damn! Zoro looked at Kuina's calm face, refused to lose and climbed up, picked up the fallen 2 bamboo swords, posing them against Kuina's face. Huh? Seeing this scene, Koshiro was somewhat surprised. He did not expect that Zoro should be so resilient. Faced with the vast strength gap with Kuina, he should not have the courage to fight again. Kuina was also surprised because Zoro's current posture was actually a standard Nitoryo posture, so she asked aloud, have you ever learned the Nitoryo, 2 swords style? No. Zoro said fiercely, today is the first time I ever held a shina, a bamboo sword. The first time? Master Koshiro still had a smile on his face, while repeating this sentence. Ian knows what Master Koshiro was thinking. The first time he holds a bamboo sword, he was able to do the pose of 2-handed swordsmanship without a teacher. Zoro, the idiot with the green algae head, his talent in swordsmanship was as good as Kuina's. At this time, Zoro did not know what Koshiro and Ian thought about, but he was watching Kuina closely. Damn, I'm strong, and I'm going to be stronger in the future. How could I lose to a girl here? Holding a dissatisfied idea, Zoro shouted and rushed toward Kuina, Then she slammed the sword on his face. It hurts so much the disciples of the dojo couldn't help shivering when they saw this scene, why didn't he dodge it? Boom! Zoro fell, shaking on the ground twice. Ian saw his sullen face. The fool was like a wild boar. He ran rampant and thought that he could beat Kuina by brute force. There was no technical content at all, and it wasn't strange to lose. 1 point. That's all. Master Koshiro made a decision and ended the competition. Zoro, the green algae fool, could not hear him. He was lying on the ground with a red trace on his face. Kuina put her bamboo sword in front of him and said, "You are obviously a layman, and you want to use the Nitoryu, and you are still 10 years old." Zoro woke up leisurely and turned around. When he heard this, he could not help holding Kuina's bamboo sword. He was still unconvinced. Kuina frowned and said, "Why, do you want to compete again?" Unexpectedly, what they didn't expect was that Zoro the bachelor said, "Damn it, a loss is a loss." Master Koshiro smiled and praised the words, "That's right, very good. Well, I'll join you. Do you have any objections?" Zoro sat up and asked Koshiro with crossed arms. "No." Koshiro shook his head, and he was recognized as a disciple. Kuina ignored him and turned around willing to go. But at this time, Zoro suddenly said, "I will practice hard, and then I will defeat you. Remember that." When he said that, the fool with the green algae hair still had a nosebleed. "That day won't come," Kuina said with a cold face and left. "Ian, you take him and heal his wounds," Koshiro said. Ian nodded, got up, and went to Zoro, saying, "Come with me." Zoro estimated that his nose was hurt badly, so he did not lose his temper and obediently followed Ian. In the back compartment, Ian found the medicine, cleaned Zoro's nosebleed, and then took out the cotton and stuffed in his nostrils. "Who is that girl?" Zoro asked Ian. "She's Kuina, Master Koshiro's daughter." Ian answered, "My sister, your future sister." "I'm not going to call her my sister," Zoro said with a grin, "sooner or later I will defeat her." He was stuffed with 2 cotton balls in his nose. When he said that, he seems to be so cute. Ian smiled and didn't talk. He just concentrated on preparing the drug for Zoro. In fact, he didn't know what to say to Zoro. However, he did not want to talk to Zoro, but that doesn't mean that Zoro did not talk to him. The idiot with the green algae hair did not know what he was thinking of. Suddenly, he said to Ian, "Hey, you! Why didn't you fight with me before?" Ian thought for a long time before he said solemnly, "Because I don't fight with idiots." "What are you talking about?" Zoro immediately frowned, "Who do you call an idiot?" "You." Ian said, "If I'm not mistaken, you here lost here, aren't you?" Zoro was shocked. How do you know?" Ian sighed. "How do I know? Of course, I know. The biggest impression that people have on you is that you have no sense of direction. And it's more famous than your swordsmanship." Ian was sure that this kid came to the dojo for the challenge was absolutely by luck. It was estimated that he had lost his way here, and then he saw a dojo and thought about challenging them. When the medicine was done, Ian patted Zoro's head and said, "Have a good rest." "Damn! You are obviously not much older than me. Why do you treat me like your child?" Zoro said with anger. "For me, you are a child." Ian thought about it and turned to leave the room. Zoro looked at him while thinking that this kid named Ian was so mysterious. How did he know that I would lose? I have never seen him before. In this way, Zoro lived in the dojo and formally became a disciple of Koshiro. The next day, early in the morning, Ian got up when it was not bright. He went outside the dojo and started practicing. To be honest, although he used to practice swords very seriously, he only did it during the group practice. He never practiced it alone. However, after seeing the battle between Zoro and Kuina yesterday, he was still unconvinced. It touched Ian very much. It is not for no reason that a man would become a strong person. Compared with Zoro, Ian found that he lacked a belief. When he went to bed yesterday, he thought all night, and finally realized that even if he had no talent, he could make up for it systematically. But if he had no faith and perseverance, he would not be a real strong man in any case. Zoro's appearance aroused Ian's desire to win. He felt that he could not let a child who had just touched a sword to be compared with him. So in an unprecedented way, Ian started the morning exercise. This morning's goal is to swing the sword 1,000 times. Ian held the wooden knife in his hands and began waving it rhythmically. Every time he swings, it is very slow and completely different from the practice in the dojo. The so-called swordsmanship is not so simple. According to Master Koshiro, the real swordsmanship is not just to do the appearance, but in every wave, it must concentrate his spirit on the swing of the sword and carefully experience the rhythm of each strike, the strength of the sword, until this swordsmanship becomes a memory of the muscles and an instinctual existence. It took an hour to complete, but Ian had not even reached the number of 500. At this moment, he was already sweating, his muscles began to tremble, and his arms were as heavy as lead. There has always been a voice in his mind telling him that he can't hold on, or stop, that's enough. However, as soon as he thought of Zoro's face, Ian regained his spirits, endured the pain and continued to wave his sword. Insist. Stick to it, you can do it. At this moment, Ian, who was concentrating his entire mind on swinging his sword, did not notice one thing, that was, the sound of systematic prompts that kept ringing in his mind. You have done a sword swinging exercise. Basic swordsmanship proficiency +5. You have done a sword swinging exercise. Basic swordsmanship proficiency +5. You have done a sword swinging exercise. Basic swordsmanship proficiency +5. You have done a sword swinging exercise. Basic swordsmanship proficiency +5. Chapter 4, The First Card. Koshiro lifted the quilt, got up from the bed, took his glasses and put them on, yawned slightly, and then walked out of the room. He wanted to go out and wash his face, but when he got out of the door, he saw that Kuina was looking at something behind the pillar, so he was curious and went over. He was about to ask, but Kuina turned around, put up her finger and hissed at him, whispering, "Father, keep your voice down, don't disturb big brother Ian." Koshiro looked out and saw Ian training and sweating like rain on the field. The morning sun shines on Ian, and the dripping sweat reflects the light of the sun. The muscle contours that have already appeared slightly exude the beauty of power. Koshiro could see that Ian was very tired at this time. Breathing and snoring hardly, but his sword still did not stop. What happened to Ian? This is the first time I saw him doing morning exercises. Kuina was curious. Koshiro smiled slightly, although he didn't know what was going on, he knew that Ian's practice today was more serious than ever. Don't disturb him. You can practice somewhere else. Koshiro said. Kuina nodded and shook her fist. Anaki, Ian is also trying to get stronger, I can't slack off. At this time, Ian was immersed in his own world. In fact, his mind was completely blanked out. The strong sense of fatigue attacked him, making his whole people muddled. The reason why Ian could maintain the action of swinging the sword was completely subconscious movement. Even Ian did not know how many times he had swung his sword. If nobody disturbed him, he would be able to practice until he lost all his stamina. But just then, a whirring voice suddenly came, "Hey! You are treacherous! You are practicing without waiting for me." Ian woke up from the whirlwind and turned his head to see that it was Zoro, who was looking at him angrily with two bamboo swords in his hand. The sweat dripped from his cheeks, Ian wiped it with his hand and gasped. "What treacherous? I don't remember that I need to call you." Zoro looked at Ian for a while, suddenly pointed at him, and said, "You're a tough guy too, aren't you? Come and fight with me. This kid is a challenger maniac." Ian didn't want to pay attention to him, but he shouted that he had rushed up. When he saw his aggressive posture, Ian subconsciously swung his sword at him. Bang! A hit on the front hit directly on the face. It was exactly the same as Kuina's hit yesterday. Zoro's little nose began bleeding again. Now Zoro, if we neglect his hard work, he was a complete rookie in swordsmanship. It was not surprising that Ian has practiced basic swordsmanship for so long and could win against Zoro easily. But when he hit Zoro with his sword, Ian found that his strike was different from before. Although it is a subconscious reaction, his speed and strength were perfect. What is even more ridiculous was that at this time, he heard a voice coming from his mind. "Your opponent has been defeated, you gain +50 experience." He quickly checked it in his mind and found that his basic swordsmanship proficiency has risen a lot, and even the experience value has increased. Naturally, there was experience value for his own level, but Ian has not been able to understand how to get experience value before, he did not expect to understand it until now, so by defeating an opponent, the value gets up. Can't do anything about it, because for every time he fought Kuina, he always loses, and he was embarrassed to battle with those runny-nosed children, so his opponents have been arranged into Kuina by Master Koshiro, leading him to never win a battle, and that caused him not to know how to increase the experience value. While Ian was looking at his attributes, Zoro was dealing with his nose. The red mark on his face from yesterday had not disappeared yet, and today Ian added another one. "Damn! That girl hit me like this, and so are you. Zoro said with anger as he stuffed his nose. Ian shrugged, you are blaming me? Wait and see, I'll overtake you sooner or later. Zoro glanced at Ian, went aside, and began training hard. Well, this time there is one more person on his list. Ian looked silently at the wooden knife in his hand. He didn't expect his interaction with Zoro to be produced under such circumstances. Looking up at Zoro's practice, Ian could not help but say, you fool, you spend so much energy chopping, don't you know how to concentrate your energy? Zoro had just entered the dojo, and Koshiro had not yet taught him any skills, so Zoro's practice at this time was completely chaotic. The two swords style was simply a mess, there was no technique at all. When Zoro heard Ian's voice, he paused and said, what should I do then? Ian shook his head, went over to hold his shoulder, pressed hard on his waist, and said, straighten up. Take back your buttocks and raise your head. Put your chest out. Put down the other bamboo sword and don't think about using Nitoryu before you even get started with Itoryu. After correcting Zoro's movements, Ian gave him demonstration exercises. These were taught by Master Koshiro. As a master of the dojo, Ian now teaches Zoro as a younger brother. I have to say that Zoro's talent is really amazing. Just once he taught it, he completely remembered that swordsmanship practice became very presentable. Okay, do it yourself now. Ian left him and went back to take a bath. He was full of soreness and sweat. When he was taking a shower, Ian looked at his attributes and found that his swordsmanship proficiency had risen to 28,000. The practice of swinging swords under the preoccupation could double the increase of his proficiency, which Ian had never thought of. In fact, there is a difference in the calculation of proficiency when it was with or without intention. Looking at the card store again, Ian suddenly found that the countdown had turned to 0. In other words, Ian can finally draw a card. He had been thinking about what the card was used for, but he had no chance to verify it, and finally, now the waiting was done. Immediately, Ian wanted to extract the card, but he heard a voice from the system saying, the first time you draw a card, you would get a 3-star purple card. If you draw the first 10 consecutive cards, you will get a 4-star orange card. Confirm the extraction. Ian was silent for a while. It was a typical card game mode. The first draw and the 10 consecutive draws were the same, even the classification of the cards were the same. Ian was hopeless to draw 10 times in a row because if he wants to do it, he must have 1,000,000 berries. He can only take one shot at a time, or get none. Confirm the extraction. Ian murmured. With Ian's confirmation, the card was given to him, a fantastic star pattern lights up on the back of the card, then the card turned over in a burst of light, and a long-haired warrior appeared in Ian's vision. This warrior has a handsome face, his hair brushed to the back, wearing a dark red warrior armor, holding a samurai sword in his hand. What was interesting that on his right-hand armor, there was a huge eye. You got a 3-star purple card, Samanosuke Akaki. Chapter 5, Press for Recharge. He's so familiar with the man in front of him. Isn't this the main protagonist of the game Animusha, Samanosuke Akaki? How can I get this character? Is it because I am learning swordsmanship? However, Ian was very curious about how to use this card, so he tried to check it out. Samanosuke Akaki. Card star, 3. Title, Animusha. Level, 1. Strength, 50. Speed, 50. Vitality, 50. Nen, 50. Skills, True Flash, when the enemy is about to attack you, counter-attack at a breakneck speed and cause significant damage. Bullet Flash, fight an attack immediately after the launch, with very fast speed to counter-attack, and cause great damage. Chain Flash, continuing to attack before the time of the flash fades, can cause massive damage in a row. Bonds, obtain a KO, get plus 32% vitality. Get Mori Ranmeru, get plus 25% strength. Obtain Nobunaga Oda, get plus 20% Nen. 3-star cards, even if they have just 3 skills, but that made Ian see the eyebrows dance because Ian was so familiar with these 3 skills, it can be said that the Animusha is one of the best samurai games in Japan. The card has been extracted, do you want to equip it in the card slot? As soon as the system prompts, Ian immediately confirmed that he would like to know how the card character would work. When the equipment is confirmed, the screen immediately jumped to the team mode. The team connects to his own host character. There are 6 slots, which can be equipped with cards. But now Ian only has 2 slots to unlock, and one of them has the Samanosuk Akakis card, the other slots have a small lock hanging on them. According to Ian's estimation, these locked card slots are expected to have their own level promotion to be able to unlock them. Isn't that like the usual game? After being equipped with Samanosuk Akakis card, Ian suddenly found that his attribute has changed. He found that his attribute had an extra 15 points of power and 15 points of speed, and the same has happened for the 2 other characteristics of vitality and Nen, each one has increased by 15 points. System, Equipment card, Nen is the ability to activation. This made Ian feel a little surprised. He had been wondering about how to open and get some value of the Nen, and it suddenly appeared, which was really a good thing. Ian kept thinking, and then he asked the system, 3 stars cards, can get me 30% of my attributes for each card, is that true? That's right, 10% for the 1-star card and 20% for 2 stars, and so on. The highest 5-star card gets you 50% attribute bonus. The system responded. Ian expressed his satisfaction and asked, can this card be upgraded? Yes. The card has its own level. Each time the level is raised, the card's own attributes will be improved, and at the same time, the corresponding percentage will be returned to the host. Cards can also be advanced to become higher stars, and it will also increase the percentage value of the bonus, which requires the host to develop the card. If you recharge diamonds, you can speed up the training. Recharge or something, can you wait till I have the money? Ian asked silently, how does the card advanced? Get the same character fragments and use the advanced stone for the upgrade. With the same 3-star card, you can get 30 character fragments. Ian looked at the advanced items and found that to upgrade this Samanosuk Akaki card to 4 stars, it would require 120 fragments, which meant that Ian had to collect 4 identical cards. This is expected to be a long process. Ian then looked at the skill item again. This card has 3 skills, so Ian was full of expectations. However, when Ian looked at them, he was a bit dumbfounded. He found that his skill was still basic swordsmanship. Can't the skills of the card character be used? Ian quickly asked the system. The host needs to reach the appropriate basic capabilities. The system replied. Sure enough, Ian looked at the card that had been equipped on the card slot and found that the skill description had changed. True Flash, when the enemy is about to attack you, counter-attack at a very fast speed and cause great damage, requiring primary swordsmanship skills. Bullet Flash, fight and attack immediately after the launch, with very fast speed to counter-attack, and cause great damage, requiring intermediate swordsmanship skills to activate. Chain Flash, continuing to attack before the time of the flash fades, can cause massive damage in a row, requires advanced swordsmanship skills to activate. And Ian was still only in the basic swordsmanship level. Mourned out, Ian found that he can only train himself desperately now. Later, instead of continuing the practice, Ian sat quietly in the dojo to restore his sore and trembling muscles. This is what Master Koshiro taught him, which is based on aerobic respiration and seems to be able to remove the lactic acid produced from muscles quickly. The effect is better than the massage. Sitting until noon, Kuina brought food to Ian. The dojo where Ian is located was called the Asahine Dojo in Shimatsuki village. The area of the dojo is still quite large. However, there are only 3 people who live here. The owner of the dojo, Koshiro, counts 1, and his daughter Kuina, and Sosuke, Master Koshiro's disciple. He is a middle-aged man with a mustache. He is a trainer in the dojo and was originally cultivated. When Koshiro said that Kuina could win against adults in the dojo, he actually refers to him. His younger brother. The 4 of them have been living in the dojo, and the rest of Ian's brothers, all of them, were residents of the Frost Moon village. Each time they arrive at the meal point, they go home to eat. Now, there is one more person who lives in the dojo, and that is Zoro. As the only woman in the dojo, the food has always been cooked by Kuina. Her food was not bad, and Ian enjoys it every time. When he saw Kuina coming, Ian smiled at her and got up to help arrange the dishes. What about masters? When the 2 sat down face to face and prepared to eat, Ian suddenly remembered and asked. Fathers, I have sent it to him. Kuina answered. Ian nodded and did not say much. He began to eat. In fact, for 3 months, Ian had noticed that when Kuina mentioned his father Koshiro, his name was often called Odo-san such words, but never heard her call him dad. Two different names, representing the degree of intimacy is naturally different, so Ian can feel that the relationship between Kuina and Master Koshiro seems to be a little distant. During this period of observation, Ian gradually realized why the father and daughter were like this. Master Koshiro usually has a harmless smile on his face. He is kind to everyone. However, in his heart, he always has some traditional ideas. He had always wanted a son to inherit his bent dojo, but unfortunately, Kuina's mother had given him a daughter. In his view, a female swordsman cannot be the strongest because of her physical limitations. Although Master Koshiro has also loved his daughter Kuina, in the usual occasional talks, it is inevitable to reveal a kind of regret. Kuina is a smart child who can naturally feel her father's thoughts. In order not to disappoint her father, under such influence, Kuina gradually began to change to a boy's personality. She stayed with short hair and began to practice the kendo desperately so that she continued to become stronger. She finally defeated the younger brother of Koshiro and wanted to prove to her father that she could inherit his dojo and his ambition. All of these are just to get more love from her father. Unfortunately, these performances can't reverse the traditional ideas of Koshiro. He still insists that a girl can't inherit the dojo. Kuina may not be aware of this, but Ian as an adult can easily see his thoughts. "Brother Ian, what are you thinking about?" Ian was distracted. After hearing Kuina's voice, he suddenly came back to his mind. He looked at Kuina and found that her beautiful eyes were full of curiosity. "This fish is delicious. Kuina, your cooking skills have improved again." Ian praised her and took the opportunity to open the subject. "My uncle sent it, he was fishing in the village." Kuina smiled sweetly, and only in her usual life, she would show such a girl's smile. While they were eating and talking, a figure suddenly broke into the dojo. Zoro came in sweaty, looking as if he had just finished practicing, and saw the two having lunch. He immediately shouted, "Ah! You are so cunning that you have already eaten. What about me?" Chapter 6, It's too hard to run with this idiot. Kuina took the rice with her chopsticks and put it into her mouth, without looking at him, and said, "You're in the kitchen, go get it yourself." Zoro ran to the kitchen, and he didn't take a long time to come, bringing a plate filled with a bowl of rice and a large fish. He placed the plate next to them, sat on the floor, raised the bowl and shouted, "Itadakimasu." And then he gobbled it up. That looks like he was probably starving. When Kuina saw Zoro like this, she couldn't help but sighed coldly, "You are a freeloader and dare to eat so much." The children come to the dojo to study kendo. They paid tuition fees. Although they are not many, they are also the source of income for the dojo. As disciples, the only two who did not pay tuition fees in the dojo, one is Ian, and the other is the newly joined Zoro. However, the property of the dojo also includes a field for planting food, so Ian usually helps the farmer with the planting. So he does not count as a freeloader. When he heard Kuina's words, Zoro squatted for a long time. Then he got up, his mouth was still filled with grains of rice, but suddenly he bowed in place and said solemnly to Kuina, "I'm sorry, I will help the dojo in the future." After saying this, the little kid sat down with ease and continued chewing and eating heavily, as if he had not paid any attention to Kuina's words just now. Ian was speechless. This green algae-headed fool isn't the usual nervous streak. Kuina's irony didn't work. She hated it so much that she could only poke her rice hard, and Ian burst laughing. When the meal was over, Zoro was already lying on the ground, clapping his belly and saying, "I'm full." Kuina got up and wanted to clean up her plate, but at this time, Zoro stood up and said to her, "Now that we are eaten, let's fight." Originally, Kuina wanted to ignore him, but at this time Ian said, "I'll clean up the dishes, you can battle him." After that, without giving Kuina a chance to speak, he got up and packed up the 3 plates together, and walked toward the kitchen with a smirk. He knows exactly what's going to happen next. If he remembers correctly, Zoro will always live in Kuina's shadow, and he will be beaten with a record of 0 wins and 2001 defeats. So, the next step is the process of Zoro being ravaged by Kuina. How could a small plate make Ian miss this good show? Sure enough, by the time Ian came out, Zoro and Kuina were just about to start the battle. Compared with yesterday's battle, Zoro's moves today were no longer a fuss, and he learned a lot from the lessons about the posture that Ian had given him in the morning. However, it was not enough to rely only on this. His timing and strength are still problematic. After a rush of attack, Kuina seized the flaw and hit Zoro in the stomach with her bamboo sword. He flew out directly. Ian could see clearly that Zoro's eyes were bulging out. Cough. Lying on the ground, Zoro has almost spit out his gallbladder, but after some coughs, his eyes were still so unwilling. Ian was going to laugh at him, but after seeing Zoro's eyes, he couldn't smile. Yes, that was the kind of look, which meant that he would never give up. Thinking of this, Ian stood up, walked over to Kuina, and said, "Kuina, do you still have the strength?" Kuina taught Zoro a little lesson. She really wanted to leave, but then Ian stood up. At this moment, she was stunned a bit and then she replied, "Of course." "Then, let's battle." Ian was very serious. "It's very rare that you take the initiative to challenge me, Anaki Ian." When Ian heard this, he also felt a little agitated. Before, he never took the initiative to challenge Kuina because he wasn't strong enough to win and he didn't win once. But who will go to the pole for abuse if he can't win? Nevertheless, since he drew the card, he also wanted to see how much power it could bring to him. Zoro stopped coughing when he saw that the two were going to fight, and quickly ran to the side to get a seat, then sat down to watch. In the arena, Ian and Kuina stood face to face, staring at each other tightly while holding bamboo swords, perceiving each other's tiny movements. When Ian saw Kuina's shoulders sway slightly, he said, "Come on." In the next second, Kuina had already rushed toward him. Her pace moved very fast, but unfortunately, Ian's reaction was faster. Without thinking, he thrust his sword to Kuina's direction. The speed of this sword was beyond Kuina's imagination. She quickly dislocated herself and swept the bamboo sword, blocking Ian's attack. Then the two of them leaped back and began to attack each other. The sound of bamboo swords clattered constantly, blocked and counterattacked, and they met in a dozen times. There were not many gorgeous movements between the two. Professor Koshiro's kendo has no special swordsmanship. In fact, for so many years, whether Kuina or Ian, what they have learned are all basic movements. However, it is these basic movements that make the confrontation between the two more intense and so fierce that Zoro, who is watching the battle, was looking silly. Evenly matched. Ian could feel that he has made a tie with Kuina for the first time. He discovered a huge change in his body, his shooting and reaction speed has increased, and every time he swung the sword, it felt more powerful. Although the sudden increase in power made Ian feel a little unsatisfactory about retracting, it was undeniable that the improvement of strength caused great trouble to Kuina. Missing part. However, the intense fight brought them huge physical exhaustion. After a long fight, Ian and Kuina stopped at the same time. Both of them looked at each other breathlessly holding their swords, and sweat trickled down. Brother Ian, your progress is amazing." Kuina took this opportunity and asked him curiously, "Yesterday you lost to me. How did you do that? You're not letting me win all this time, are you?" "No." Ian shook his head, but he dared not admit that. With Kuina's pride, if he dared to admit that he had been letting her win, she might hate him and never talk to him again. So he explained, "That's because I practiced more seriously than ever, so I made pretty good progress." "Really?" Kuina suddenly remembered the scene of Ian's exercises in the morning. That concentration was not deceptive people, so she immediately accepted Ian's statement. "It's a tie, okay?" Ian wiped his sweat and said, "I'm out of breath." Kuina was still unwilling. Like Zoro, she was also a strong child. She would not be willing to fail when she beat her rivals all over the village. But when Ian said that, she had to stop. Fortunately, a tie is not a failure, right? Kuina left, and Ian standing still and gasped, looking down at his sweaty palm, thinking, maybe putting physical exercise and strength training on the agenda. Although it was a short fight with Kuina, he was able to detect his physical deficiencies. Cards gave him a direct increase in strength and speed, so he must also adapt to these changes as soon as possible. To hear. The current attributes show that his strength and speed are both 20, and his value of the nin has increased a little, reaching 15 points. That is to say, if he can fully use his own attributes, he can be better than a standard marine soldier. However, it is still slag. With that in his mind, Ian suddenly noticed someone pulling his sleeve, looked down and found that it was Zoro. Now Ian is a 10-year-old child, Zoro was younger, and Ian was taller than Zoro. He looked down at him, and Zoro looked up at him. "What?" Ian asked him. "Brother Ian, will you teach me? I want to win against that girl." Zoro uttered such a sentence. This was the first time hearing Zoro calling himself this way. It is estimated that it was because of the battle with Kuina. Ian was somewhat excited about this title. But after hearing Zoro's proposal, Ian also felt a little heartbeat. Although he didn't want to admit it, the appearance of Zoro really stimulated Ian. If he could exercise with him, he would practice with Zoro's strenuous efforts. It would be very helpful for him to practice with Zoro. "That's good. Starting tomorrow, you can exercise with me," Ian responded. Master Kojiro, the master of his Hine dojo, did not teach his disciples personally. Most of the time, his disciples took the place of him. Even Ian, a formal disciple, seldom saw him. Ian always felt that Kojiro's strength was a mystery. So Zoro followed him, and he was taught by him. It seemed that it did not matter much. So the next day, when Ian got up to exercise in the morning, there was a small tail behind him. "Let's run first." Seeing Zoro looking at him, Ian could only teach him using the hard ways. "Follow me, let's run around the village first." "Ahaha." Zoro nodded his head vigorously. Ian turned around and began to run. He did not run a few meters, but he found that Zoro wasn't following. Looking back, he found that Zoro had actually run out in the opposite direction. "Come back! You idiot!" Ian's head was so blue that he roared, "You can lose me, even when we are so close." Zoro heard the shout, quickly turned around, and wanted to keep up. However, in the sight of Ian, the kid had just run 2 steps and suddenly made an inexplicable turn. Ian didn't know how to make complaints, but from a young age, the dumbest man in history for sensing the directions was really well-deserved name. Chapter 7, Level Up Swordsmanship. Ian felt so tired. He didn't know whether it was a mistake to take Zoro to exercise with him. He had run around the village while correcting the direction of the idiot 128 times. He spent the whole morning shouting at the directional idiot Zoro. When they finally finished running, Ian took him to a small forest near the sea. "Hey, race the place where we will practice swordsmanship," Ian panted and said. "After the swordsmanship exercise, let's do some strength exercises." Another 1,000 swing of the sword, and the whole time he was concentrated on the exercises, but he didn't know if he could gradually get used to it. After Ian finished the sword training, he found that his muscles of both arms were not as weak as yesterday. Ian completed the practice of swordsmanship step by step, then he found several ropes, tied them up to 2 large stones weighing tens of kilograms with ropes, and then looked for a stronger tree. He threw the ropes between the branches, using the branches as levers, dragged the ropes with his left and right hand, and began pulling them up with fists. This is a simple way to train your body, isn't it? When Ian worked hard to increase his strength, Zoro was still doing swordsmanship exercises. After mastering the basic movements of swordsmanship yesterday, Zoro took 2 bamboo swords and attacked the target stump with all his power. It seems that he intended to use the Nitoryu. Ian did not take so much care of him. The two were practicing together, and they used each other as an object of encouragement. At most, Ian corrects Zoro's movements from time to time. When Zoro's swordsmanship was finished, Ian's strength training also came to an end. He was sweating so hard that he could not wait to lie down on the ground. "It's my turn." Zoro couldn't wait to pick up the ropes that Ian had dropped. For a child, the 2 big stones weren't so easy to be lifted. Ian looked at Zoro's gnashing teeth and smiled. He tied smaller stones with the remaining ropes, and then passed them to Zoro. "Here you are, bite this with your teeth. This will strengthen your jaw muscles," Ian said. "Why?" Zoro was puzzled and asked foolishly, "You didn't do it. Listen to me, you'll use it later." Ian had a mysterious smile. Yes, he will definitely use it in the future, because the road he will follow in the future isn't just Nitoryu, but he will a master of the Santoryu. "Thank me later, I will help you exercise in advance, you will have a strong mouth." Due to the smart move of Ian, Zoro began exercising his 3 swords style ahead of its time, only to see him biting the rope and lifting the stone by his mouth as hard as possible. Standing upright, his arms were pulling the other 2 rocks. His whole body began to tremble, but he persisted bit by bit. Instead of taking care of him, Ian picked up a bigger stone and raised his hands on top of his head. Like lifting weights, he kept doing squatting exercises. This is the way he just thought of. This exercise focus of the waist, abdomen, and legs, and can effectively increase his speed. At present, his attribute growth is nothing more than 2 points, one is derived from the card's bonus, and the other is his own level of improvement. In addition, Ian was also thinking whether his own attributes can also be increased through the exercise. So all the training he's doing now is just fumbling. There wasn't much conversation between the two, and they sweated like rain. So they practiced till noon, and finally stopped after they couldn't continue because of their aches and pains. Lying on the ground, both of them gasped heavily. Ian adjusted his breath and tried to recover his strength as soon as possible. How long did it take him to finally get up and try to call for Zoro, only to find out that the kid was asleep? Did his sleepiness problem happen from childhood? Ian shook his head helplessly, lifted Zoro on his back, and moved slowly towards the dojo step by step. What they don't know was that a little above the hillside where they were training, Kuina came out with tiredness and sweat, but her eyes are full of stubbornness when she looks down at Ian and Zoro's exercising place. After lunch and rest, Ian took Zoro to the field of the dojo, waving their hose and starting work, and in the evening, he continued exercising. In the meantime, whenever Zoro got the chance, he would go to Kuina and challenge her. Unfortunately, Kuina defeated him every time. It's strange to say that Ian and Kuina can now have a tie. It is said that Ian and Kuina battle in the same way, but Zoro seldom challenges Ian. He practices with Ian more, but his pleasure was to challenge Kuina, even if he was beaten badly every time, but after the wound was healed, he went back. This situation occurs at least 3 or 4 times a day. For a time, Ian wondered if Zoro was an M. What Ian didn't know was that Zoro was a stupid idiot stubborn fool. The idea was actually very simple. For Ian, who had been exercising with him, Zoro gave him the position of his brother, his Anaki, but for Kuina, her positioning was an opponent. Different positioning naturally results in different treatment. It is normal to be beaten occasionally by his brother, but if he was hit by his opponent, he couldn't bear it. In addition to challenging Kuina, Zoro was almost inseparable to Ian, and just as Zoro is unwilling to lose to Kuina, Ian is reluctant to be compared with this kid who is 2 years younger than him. The two worked hard together to become stronger, and in turn stimulated Kuina, and secretly continued to practice. There was a kind of inexplicable competition among the 3 kids. Koshiro naturally sees this scene in his eyes, but he does not have any hindrance or a smiley expression. In this way, more than a month has passed. During this month, Ian's body has undergone tremendous changes. His muscles have begun to take shape. Although it is still a little thin because of the child's body, the momentum of that strength has already started to emanate. His conjecture has been verified, self-exercise can also improve his attributes. However, this kind of ascension is relatively slow. Take strength exercise as an example. If he can lift 100 kilograms of weight at the limit of 20 points of strength, he must break this limit, lift 110 kilograms or more, and each time he breaks through the limit, he will bring a little increase of strength. Over the past month, Ian has continuously increased the weight of the stones for exercise, but only increased the strength of 3 points. It's slow, but it's a supplement to Ian's strength. After all, in Frost Moon Village, a peaceful village, there are no mountain thieves, let alone enemies. Ian can only find Kuina and Zoro as his usual rivals. Besides, he can't find anyone who can increase his experience. However, Kuina can't beat him, at the most they tie, so he doesn't get experience. But he could gain experience from beating Zoro, but that only given too little, only 50 points, but now he got up from level 1 to level 2, but it needed him 1000 points of experience. It's embarrassing to beat him every day, right? In other words, in a short period, Ian's level could not be greatly improved. If he could not upgrade, the card could not be further upgraded. He asked the system about the card level, and the answer was not that the card can't exceed the host's level. So the only way to increase attributes was to exercise on his own. Fortunately, after more than a month of unremitting practice, his basic swordsmanship proficiency was finally full. How do you say this? This feeling was very wonderful, when the basic swordsmanship is full, and the moment of promotion to the primary swordsmanship, when Ian is holding a bamboo sword in his hand, suddenly found that his muscles' memory on using the sword has become completely different. Without a trace of obstruction and stagnation, the bamboo sword in his hand no longer has the feeling of foreign tools like in the past. It is like being part of his body, unexpectedly able to do as arm instructions. Perhaps that was thanks to the long-term unremitting practice. The improvement of the swordsmanship realm has been accomplished successfully, and the bottleneck in Ian's imagination has not appeared. Should this be a sublimation process from quantitative change to qualitative change? Ian thought so. Primary swordsmanship, you have a qualitative understanding of one of the swordsmanships, your swordsmanship speed plus 10%, and destructive power 10%. This is the system's description of the attributes of the primary swordsmanship. The speed of the swordsmanships was well understood, but the increase of destructive power, Ian was somewhat confused. The data is data, but what is the 10% destructive power? There seems to be no quantitative criterion for it. So he thought about it, and Ian could only think of it as a more serious injury after hitting his opponent. Chapter 8, A Big-Faced Man. The improvement of the swordsmanship has brought about a slight increase in the value of Doriki, which has now reached 20 points. In addition, Ian's most concern is that he can finally use the first skill of Samanosuke Akakis card, True Flash. The thought of killing his opponent with the True Flash when playing Animusha, Ian felt itchy and impatient. Is this time he can finally install it? I have to find someone to try using this skill on him. The first person that came to his mind was, of course, Kuina, but when he thought of her, Ian hesitated. For a short time, he also discovered that the strength of an individual can be measured by the value of the Doriki. Before the advancement of the swordsmanship, Ian has a 14-point Doriki value, trying his best, and he tied the battles with Kuina. At that time, her Doriki may be between 15 and 17, which corresponds to the impression that she can defeat the adults in the dojo. During this period, Ian also found that Kuina is still trying her best to become stronger. It is estimated that Ian is similar to Kuina in terms of Doriki. However, Ian can now use his secret technique, the True Flash. According to the description of this swordsmanship, it may be quite powerful. If he accidentally hit Kuina in the match, it is likely that she will be injured. In this village, the only thing Ian didn't want was to hurt Kuina, so he won't try his new skill on her. Otherwise, go to the teacher, Sosuke, or find Master Kojiro. With this in mind, Ian stopped practicing and said to Zoro, who was still doing muscle exercises for his arms and mouth, "You keep practicing hard, and I'll go back to the dojo." After hearing Ian's words, Zoro naturally had to respond. He just wanted to say okay. As a result, his mouth was opened, and the stone fell and hit his foot. Ouch! With a scream, Solon was suddenly tragic. Idiot! Ian shook his head silently, ignoring Zoro, who was jumping up and down on the back of his feet, and went to the village. After coming to the dojo, Ian found that his younger brothers who were supposed to be training were gathering together and talking about something outside the dojo. Have you seen it? That person is so tall. Let me say, his face is the biggest. Yeah, this is the first time I see someone with such a big face. Ian listened curiously and asked aloud, "What are you doing around here instead of practicing?" Hearing this voice, the group of younger brothers quickly turned around. One of the children with watermelon head came running over with a runny nose and asked, "Brother Ian, there are foreigners in the village. When we were at the seaside today, we saw a big face in those people. It was amazing." The other younger brothers also nodded along, chattering around Ian to describe the man. Ian's heart moved. He suddenly remembered something and asked, "Is there a newspaper? Who took the latest newspaper?" Since he started training with Zoro, Ian recently did not go to help Master Kojiro by getting him newspapers. This job was handed to another young disciple. When they heard his question, one of the bald little brothers rushed to the dojo and took out a newspaper and handed it to Ian. Ian opened the newspaper and saw a huge headline on the front page. In the East Blue, even the small village of Frost Moon Village knows that this is the most beautiful country in the East Blue, can attract the world's nobles, the celestial dragons, to visit, as can be seen. However, Ian knows that this so-called most beautiful country only hides all dirty things and excludes some unbeautiful things, which is a model of isolated society. As soon as he read the name of the Goa Kingdom in the newspaper, Ian suddenly remembered one thing, Sabo's early voyage to the sea. This sick country, for the sake of the tidiness and beauty of its own city, cleaned all the garbage out of the town, concentrated it outside the city, and drove all the unsightly vagrants and unemployed to live in the garbage hill. Then they built a high wall to separate the garbage hill from the city and form two different worlds. They call this the Grey Terminal. On weekdays, they don't care about the garbage mountain, as if their country does not have such a place, but when the celestial dragons decided to visit, they chose to burn the garbage hills clean in order to prevent the odor of garbage hills from polluting the air. Knowing that many people are living there, they still choose to do so. They have never thought about what will happen to those vagrants when they lose the soil they depend on to survive. They are so indifferent that they are suffocating and cruel. Although Sabo is a nobleman of this country, his nature is to yearn for freedom. He has always wanted to escape from the place where he felt suffocated. After knowing that the garbage hill would be burned, Sabo had been trying to find a way to inform his two brothers, Luffy and Ace, but he was imprisoned by his parents at home. His brother's life and death were uncertain, but the people of the Goa Kingdom were indifferent and careless. Sabo finally saw the ugliness and hypocrisy of the world and could not bear it. He finally chose to flee. He knocked out the guard, left a letter to Luffy and Ace, and took a boat to sea ahead of his time. However, unfortunately, the day he went to sea coincided with the arrival of the world's noblemen. On the oncoming big ship, Sabo chose to avoid them politely and also imagined that he would one day become the captain of such a big ship, sailing across the sea. However, it was unexpected that his politeness could not be understood by the arrogant celestial dragons, and could not allow a Dalit to pass next to him, so they attacked Sabo's ship directly. In the world of One Piece, the world government has always regarded the pirates as cancers, but in Ian's view, these so-called world aristocratic celestial dragons are the real cancer. These self-righteous celestial dragons can be said to be the ugliest collection of human nature. Thinking of this, Ian couldn't help but sigh. If he remembers correctly, the big-faced person that the younger brothers said should be Emporio Ivankov. Ivankov, a cadre of the Revolutionary Army, appeared there. That means that Luffy's father, the supreme commander of the Revolutionary Army, Monkey D. Dragon, also went to the East Blue, and now should be on his way to the Goa Kingdom. Putting down the newspaper, Ian stood up and asked the younger brothers, "Keep practicing here, I will go and have a look." "Ah, Anaki Ian, you are so cunning that you don't take us." Watermelon Head Kid couldn't help shouting. Ian touched his head with a funny smile and walked out of the dojo. Ivankov came to Frost Moon Village because he was separated from Dragon. It was a secret operation of Dragon to go to the Goa Kingdom. Naturally, it was impossible to bring Ivankov with him. His huge face was so eye-catching that it would be exposed. Ian chose to go and see Ivankov. First, he was curious to see the legendary monster in person. Secondly, he was also interested to know if he could meet Dragon. There are many mysterious characters in the world of the One Piece. Luffy's father, Dragon, is one of them, and nobody knows his origin or his strength. What he plays is the existence of a big behind-the-scenes boss. Chapter 9, Haki. As Ian wanted to go, he just came to the entrance of the village and saw the person he wanted to see. A group of 7 or 8 people was walking toward the village at this time. The first one was a very tall fellow, who could be at least 2 meters in height. He was covered in a green cloak, but his face was visible, and in Ian's eyes, Ivankov's face accounted for half of his body. For Ian, this face was almost the same height as his 10-year-old body. Ah, Ilko! He's frightening. Even though Ian was mentally prepared, he was shocked by this face. Ivankov has thick eyeshadows and long eyelashes, and his lips are covered with purple lip gloss. The whole person looks like a ghost. When he watched Ivankov in the anime, he only thought that it is exaggerated, but after seeing the real person, Ian only felt some fear. No wonder why Dragon didn't want to take him to that mission. Looking at his heavy makeup with this big face. How much would it take them to notice this creature? Looking behind Ivankov, Ian saw another character who was left behind by Dragon. It was a taller man than Ivankov, who was also wearing a green cloak, but on the cap of the cloak, there were 2 round ears. "Uncle Kuma, your cute bear's ear cap completely sold you out. Do you think people will not recognize you if you wear a cloak?" That's right, Ivankov was followed by another revolutionary cadre, Bartholomew Kuma. At that moment of seeing them, Ian finally knew why Ivankov's companion was Kuma. Just their height, their unique and distinctive style, other people can't match with them. Except for Kuma and Ivankov, the other few people were not so eye-catching. Although they looked cool in their cloaks, they should be ordinary members of the Revolutionary Army. When Ian complete analyzing them, they noticed him too. Who is this black-haired child? Is it okay to be seen by a kid? Several members of the Revolutionary Army whispered, but Ivankov did not care that much, went to Ian and looked down at him. Hey! Boy! The dress you wear, are you studying in the village dojo? Ian came back to this moment and nodded. Your dojo is called the Ashiin Dojo? Ivankov pointed to Ian's cross-embroidered double swords on his chest and said, I remember, it seems to be this name. How do you know? Ian felt curious. Do you know Master Kojiro? Ivankov turned his head and looked at Kuma behind him, but Kuma had no expression. He was holding a book and looking at it, very focused. Then Ivankov turned back to Ian and said, That's right. Boy, I know him. What is it for? Ian was somewhat puzzled, but he didn't ask much. Can you take us to your dojo? Ivankov asked. Ian's eyes turned around. He didn't know what his master Kojiro had to do with the Revolutionary Army. It's not a problem to take them to the master, but it was rare to encounter a bunch of outsiders here, and it is a pity not to use them. So he nodded and said, Yes, but you have to promise me something. Ivankov asked curiously, What do you want? Ian looked at the Revolutionary Army soldiers behind him and pointed at them, It's very simple, just one of you come and fight with me. What? The Revolutionary Army soldiers were so surprised that they thought they had misheard. One of them even came forward and stooped to touch Ian's head. Don't make trouble, kid, he said. Would you take us to the dojo? I'll give you candy. Hey, let me go. Master Kojiro touched my head, even if you dare to treat me as a child? Ian clapped his hand, looked at the sword he was carrying around his waist, and said, Good, it's you then. The revolutionary soldier suddenly became dumbfounded. He had no idea that this kid had such personality, so he had to look at Ivankov for help. Ivankov looked at Ian and found that the expression on his face was serious, so he said, Don't hurt this boy. The revolutionary soldier nodded helplessly, stood in the same place, did not pull his sword. He posed himself and said to Ian, Okay, come on, kid. I won't use weapons, I'll just fight you with my fist. Ian didn't accept his nonsense. He rushed up with his bamboo sword. At the first encounter, the revolutionary soldier almost suffered a great loss. He didn't expect that Ian's speed would be so fast. With his eyes were fixed, he dangerously avoided Ian's chopping and almost broke into a cold sweat. Ian didn't care much, the long practice in the dojo has made him turn his sword into an instinct. After the revolutionary soldier avoided it, Ian immediately seized the gap under his opponent's ribs and stabbed it with his sword. To be able to follow Ivankov's side, even ordinary fighters have real skills. The revolutionary soldier dodged Ian's attack, raised his leg and kicked Ian. However, when he just kicked him, he regretted it because he was forced to take it seriously by a child and put all his efforts into it. With that in mind, he unconsciously took in a little strength. However, what he did not know was that Ian waited for it. The launching of true flash skill is conditional, that is, it can only be launched when the opponent is about to attack him. If this revolutionary soldier kept dodging and didn't fight back, how can Ian use his skill? So when he saw the kick coming, Ian did not blink and kept staring closely at his movements. When the opponent's foot was about to kick him, Ian wanted to use the flash of skill. Just unexpectedly, the next second, he was hit, kicked in the face, and directly flew out. The revolutionary soldier himself did not think of Ian's trick. After hitting him like a ball, he was shocked and rushed to see Ian. Ian's half-face was so hurt. He was lying on the ground grinding his teeth. He had no idea that his flash skill had failed to activate, causing him to get a painful kick. This flash skill is harder to grasp the timing than imagined. You're all right? The revolutionary soldier asked with concern. Ian shook his head and climbed up from the ground, holding the bamboo sword tightly, and said, Come again. The revolutionary soldier waved his hand and said, No, if you come again, I'm afraid you'll be injured. Don't worry, I haven't lost yet. Is it because Ian has stayed with Kuina and Zoro for a long time? Ian found that he also has the spirit of not accepting the loss. What is such a little pain? Looking at him like this, the revolutionary soldier had no choice but to accept the challenge of Ian again. Ivankov stood by and looked at them all the time. He was very interested that he enjoyed Ian as a child who wanted to challenge adults. He appreciated Ian's spirit. But Kuma held his book in his hand. He did not know whether he was reading or watching the battle between Ian and the soldier. Ian was more serious. In fact, in the beginning, he regarded these revolutionary soldiers who were in the background of anime as weak trash. He thought they were not very strong. But now he found that this is the real world. Even weak trash, in fact, were very strong, at least better than the children, whose body has not yet fully grown up. The two attacked again. The Revolutionary Army soldier found that Ian's shot speed was even faster. He had to fight back again to defeat him and end this embarrassing battle. He did not dare to kick again this time. Instead, he used his fist. The strength of his fist was better controlled than that of his foot. He did not really want to hurt Ian. However, Ian, who was in a state of concentration at this time, reacted very sharply. Seeing the soldier's fist coming to his face, he once again seized the opportunity to launch the true flash. Just as the revolutionary soldier's fist was about to hit Ian, Ian suddenly disappeared from his sight. No one could see how Ian's footsteps were moving, except that he appeared at the revolutionary soldier's side in an instant, holding up a bamboo sword and splitting it down at an incredible speed. The speed of the sword was so fast, with a kind of whistling sound, like a shadow, a flash of light in the air, hit the revolutionary soldier in the back severely. The Revolutionary Army soldier was a tall adult, but after the blow on his back, he only felt a tremendous force hitting him. Under such heavy pressure, the bones on his back seemed to mourn. His whole body fell down involuntarily and was hit from the standing state by the slam, and at the moment of falling, his mouth could not help but scream. Ivankov, who watched the battle, was even more surprised. He was not surprised that a child could defeat an adult, but at what he had just perceived. Dragging the cloak, he couldn't help turning around on one leg, revealing his muscular thighs in net stockings. Hey! It is the fluctuation of the haki? Did the boy awaken the haki at such a young age? Unfortunately, Ian did not hear his words. At the moment when the revolutionary soldier yelled, Ian himself could not help but scream. The difference was that the soldier of the Revolutionary Army screamed because of the pain on his back, while Ian screamed because of a headache. Yes, Ian's flash finally succeeded, but what he didn't realize was that it was accompanied by a piercing headache, which made him unable to hold the bamboo sword in his hand. He finally knows why the description of the flash skill says that it can cause great harm because, after the first flash, Ian's only 15 points of the nin was consumed. At the same time, he can feel that when he splits that sword, there was a certain force wrapped around his whole sword. That should be from using the nin. It was because of the nin was wrapped around his sword that knocked the revolutionary soldier down. That was very similar to the usage of armed haki, so Ivankov had such an exclamation. It is a pity that the first time using the flash skill, he fainted. Once he really used his nin, he couldn't grasp the consumption of his ability, which led to the use of all his mind force at once, and with an emptied mind energy, that brought him a strong irritating headache. Ian sat down on the ground and held his head to alleviate this pain, but in Ivankov's eyes, that became a sign of Ian's awakening his haki. Chapter 10, Don't touch my head again. Will that be haki? Ivankov has met so many people using the haki, but he was surprised by Ian's age. The haki is a potential force possessed by all human beings, as instinct exists, but most people are not aware of it or cannot exert it all their lives. Under normal circumstances, only after hard training and tempering, can people grasp the way to use it. Therefore, people who can generally use haki are adults. Nevertheless, Ivankov saw an exception today. The exception was Ian. Looking at his height, he is at most 12 years old, maybe less, but such a small child has awoken the haki. So at this moment, he looked at Ian like a very talented kid, no, like a monster. Ian sat on the ground, holding his head for a long time before he felt his headache eased slightly. Before he asked the system what was going on, he suddenly heard a series of prompts from the system. You have beaten an opponent who is above your strength and earned 500 points of experience. You've won the Achievement Award, the first time using your nin skills on a fight. You have acquired basic concepts of practicing skills. Current proficiency, 0. What's going on? Ian endured the headache and looked it up in his mind. It's understandable that the value of experience has suddenly increased dramatically. In fact, in the beginning, Ian was very careful. The reason why he chose a Revolutionary Army soldier to be an opponent, he wanted to test the true flash, and also wanted to see if he could defeat the other side and get the value of experience. In his opinion, as a child, the other side would surely show mercy, which naturally gives him the chance to win. To put it bluntly, the revolutionary soldier was actually pitted by Ian. However, what he did not expect was that he could gain so much experience by defeating his opponent who is stronger than him. Now Ian's experience value has risen to 750 points, it will soon be able to upgrade again, and then it will usher in the improvement of his attributes. After using the flash skill, Ian also got an achievement award. When he opened the achievement interface, he found that the reward was actually 5 books of experience. This book of experience wasn't intended for Ian but was used to upgrade the card level. In addition to this achievement award, Ian also saw other rewards in the achievement interface, such as defeating 10 opponents, defeating 100 opponents or reaching 50 points of Dora Key or reaching 100 points of Dora Key and so on. The rewards given by these achievements are different. Ordinary is the book of experience, higher ones give the advanced stone and diamond award, among which diamond rewards are the least. Ian was not surprised. He knows the pitfalls of the game system very well. This small amount of diamond rewards, in fact, the real purpose of those rewards is to attract you to recharge diamonds. The most unexpected thing for Ian was that he has just acquired basic skills practice. When he saw his basic swordsmanship skills, Ian was wondering if there were any other kinds of basic skills. He didn't expect that they really appeared now. Basic Nen practice, increase the number of restore per hour of the Nen, current restore value, 1 point, current proficiency, 0/1000. After reading the description of this skill, Ian realized that it was used to restore his own mental strength. Yet, the skills acquired from cards almost depend on the mind energy, while he only has a little bit value of the Nen. What should he do when he runs out of it? Now with this basic Nen practice skill, even if he used up his energy of the Nen, he now can recover it slowly after a period of rest. Just he didn't know how the proficiency of this skill will grow? Is it difficult to constantly consume its own value of energy to improve? Well, most likely. Well, haven't you seen that skill proficiency is too much lower than the swordsmanship skills? Ian's swordsmanship skills have been upgraded to the primary swordsmanship. The proficiency required to upgrade to intermediate swordsmanship has turned into 1,000,000. When he first saw it, he even took a breath of cold air. Compared with the present practice skills, it felt like a fortress. Perhaps it is because of the slow recovery effect of this skill, Ian's headache has been alleviated. Just as he was thinking about it, he suddenly found someone in front of him. Looking up, it was Ivankov's face that caught his eye. At close range, his face was even more frightening. Ian stepped back and asked, "What are you doing?" "Hip hip. Boy." Ivankov seemed to be in a happy mood, turning around again and saying to Ian, "That was amazing. What's your name?" "My name is Ian." "Ian Little Candy." Ivankov said, "How are you feeling now? Do you want me to treat you?" "No, I am better." Ian quickly waved. Ivankov's good intentions, Ian couldn't accept it. In front of this horm fruit user, he does not even know whether he is a man or a woman, although the image is male now, at any time he can be incarnated as a woman. In the face of this free control of hormones, Ian firmly does not intend to let him touch his body. Who knows if he will use the healing hormone or the sex hormone? "All right." Ivankov nodded and said, "Don't worry too much. Your headache should be the after effect of awakening the Haki. It's not a big problem. By the way, do you know what Haki is?" If this was asked by anyone who knew him well in Frost Moon Village, Ian would undoubtedly pretend to be naive, but it was Ivankov who asked this. Ian did not need to hide anything. He nodded directly and said, "I know." He knows that Ivankov may have regarded his ability to the Haki, so that's why he asked. But Ian knows his own business. Since this time, Ian has been trying to figure out his own Nen ability. In his judgment, there is still some difference between the Nen and the Haki. Although the essence may be similar, the form of expression is not necessarily the same. The Nen ability was wrapped around his sword, which can simulate the effect of armed Haki but such as Haki. The mind force abilities were not necessarily simulated. He was supposed to be trying to give Ian a long talk about the Haki, but he was choked back by the words from Ian. Ian found that he was trembling all over, with a hard-pressed expression. Ivankov finally said, "You know it? Ah, that's great. Then I don't need to explain it to you. You just need to pay more attention to rest these days. Who are you? Although he already knew the name of Ivankov, Ian pretended to ask. Hip hip. I am Emporio Ivankov. Ivankov turned around and said, you can call me Eva or Evangelist, it doesn't matter what you call me, Stool. Then suddenly, Ivankov shouted angrily, I don't want to be called Stool. Ian looked at him silently and didn't say a word. At this time, several other Revolutionary Army soldiers also came around and looked at Ian with amazement. They all knew about haki, but they failed to develop it. They were shocked that Ian could use the haki at such a young age. At the same time, they thought they were living dogs. So they praised Ian. Everyone likes to listen to praise, and Ian is no exception, but the problem was that these guys were saying, damn, that's really amazing, while touching his head, which was unbearable for him. Just when Ian wanted to attack them, the revolutionary soldier who had just confronted him came over and saw that he was gritting his teeth in pain and feeling uncomfortable. Ian was still not satisfied, so he asked him, are you all right? The Revolutionary Army soldier initially felt that he was quite deficient, but the key was losing the fight to a child. However, because of his adult self-esteem, the revolutionary soldier tried hard to show a smiling face to Ian, and his white teeth flashed. Then he even touched Ian's head. Can you take us to the dojo now? Asked the revolutionary soldier. Why the heck did you touch my head again? Ian blinked, nodded cleverly, turned around and left. The crowd quickly followed him. However, what they did not expect was that they had not reached the dojo for a long time under the leadership of Ian. Strange, how do I feel that we just passed this place? A revolutionary soldier scratched his head and wondered. How is it possible? You must have misremembered it. Ian did not return to the tunnels. The army can only keep following him, but they don't know that they were completely fouled by Ian. They have circled around the whole village. This was a little revenge for the men, who gathered around him and touched his head. In fact, this has been discovered by Ian's conscience. Originally he intended to circle around more than a dozen circles. Chapter 11, iPhone XS? Here we are. Ian stopped outside the dojo. At noon, Koshiro was basking by sunlight in the yard. Ian saw him at a glance. After running over, he said to Koshiro, Sensei, someone has come to see you. When he said this, Ian kept staring at Koshiro, but he found that Koshiro was still smiling. He was not surprised by Ivankov's appearance. Hello. Long time no see. Koshiro greeted him and smiled to Ivankov and Kuma. Mr. Koshiro. Kuma remained silent, but Ivankov screamed and laughed. Ian has been paying attention to the dialogue between the two sides. He has always thought that Master Koshiro might have something to do with the Revolutionary Army, but it seemed that there was something wrong with this situation. Koshiro said nothing to Ivankov and Kuma, as well as the attitude of the revolutionary soldiers towards Koshiro, were not like the attitude of seeing their companions. How to say it, they were not familiar with each other but appeared to be polite, as if they were ordinary guests. Ian was thinking about it carefully. He felt that Master Koshiro was really a member of the Revolutionary Army. How could he stay in Frost Moon Village for so many years? Retire? Don't be funny. The Revolutionary Army has only been active in the world for a few years now. Therefore, Ian felt that Master Koshiro should not be a member of the Revolutionary Army. Is it true that, as Ivankov said, he is only an old acquaintance? Ian was so distracted that he did not hear what Master Koshiro and Ivankov said. When he saw Master Koshiro reach out and lead them into the dojo, Ian came back to his mind. The group was brought into the dojo as a guest. Since there was no special reception room in the dojo, so the two sides sat down in the venue. Ian has wanted to hear what they were going to say, but Koshiro unexpectedly asked him to make tea. Unfortunately, Ian had to go to the back kitchen to make tea. He turned around and didn't see Kuina. He didn't know where she was going to exercise. So did Zoro. The fool was probably lost in the hill. After a while, Ian boiled the water, took out several cups and brewed the tea, then put them on the plate and carried them out. When Ian arrived, the tea was given to everyone. He found that he did not know what the two sides had talked about. Although Master Koshiro smiled, he could detect a trace of desolate expression. When he saw Ian coming, Koshiro said to him again, Ian, you go to the warehouse to count and see how much food we have left. Food supplies? Ah, yes, Ivankov, they came to Frost Moon Village, it seems to be preparing food. Sure enough, Ivankov said, well, buy it by the market price. But Koshiro shook his head and said, no, it's not worth much, I will just give it to you. Ivankov did not refuse. When Ian saw that there was nothing wrong, he turned and went out. When he was ready to go to the warehouse to count the supplies, Master Koshiro's voice came from behind. Who just went out is my oldest disciple in the dojo. Ian estimated that Master Koshiro was introducing him to Ivankov, so he didn't mind. The grain in the warehouse is produced in the dojo field. So few people eat in the dojo and consume less, so there was still a lot of surpluses. Ian spent some time counting and found that there were more than 100 bags, according to a bag of about 50 kilograms to calculate, there were not more than 5,000 kilograms of grain, wheat and rice. Ian ran back and reported it to Koshiro. Ivankov finally decided to take 3,000 kilograms of grain. Ian looked at them and found that they were only 7 or 8 people. More than 3,000 kilograms of grain, how they would carry them out. However, while Ian was thinking of that, Kuma suddenly stood up and asked Ian to take him to the warehouse. He clamped the thick book under his armpit, then freed his left hand and took off his right hand glove, revealing a strange-looking palm. On the palm of that hand, there is a soft-looking paw-shaped bubble, just like a cat's paw, which makes people feel like touching when they see it. Paw fruit. Ian's mind suddenly appeared such a noun. Sure enough, Uncle Kuma, are you actually the deepest hidden thing in the world of One Piece? Even Ian had an impulse to touch his paw. Kuma walked to the place where the food was stacked and touched it gently with his right hand. Then, in Ian's astonished eyes, half of the grain disappeared in an instant. Before, Ian was wondering how they would carry the grain, but he didn't expect to use this method. Ian knows that the food that disappeared was actually shot by Kuma with his paw, and by this time, it must have landed on the shore of their boat. It's really convenient. Ian looked at Kuma admiringly. Sometimes he thinks about the unscientific things of the devil fruit. Could he get to eat one? When the bullet flew over the grain and brought his gloves. After Kuma flew the grain, he brought his gloves. Ian thought he was going out of the warehouse, but he suddenly opened his mouth and asked Ian in a low voice, if you were to travel, where'd you go? It's good that he didn't speak much, and when he did, he made Ian tremble. What the heck? Why this sentence sounds so familiar? So he quickly waved his hand and said, I don't want to travel for the time being, and even if I want to go later, I will go by boat myself. Kuma looked down at him. The height gap between them was so obvious. There was a feeling of an elephant watching a mouse. Although the side counted as a mouse made Ian very uncomfortable, he felt enormous pressure at the moment because he finally remembered that Bartholomew Kuma had another nickname and identity. Tyrant. One of the 7 Shishibukai. He won't be angry, will he? Ian thought that according to the situation of the grain he had just flown, he must have found himself taking them around the village. Otherwise, how could he have projected grain from the dojo to the coast so accurately? Ian was worried, but suddenly Kuma brought something out and handed it to Ian with his gloved palm. For taking your food, this is a gift. Kuma's voice was still low. When Ian looked at it, he found that what was in his palm was a tiny den mushi. This den mushi was pink, very small, with a shell on its back and a circle of patterns on it. It was also connected to a microphone with a wire. On the side of the shell, there was a circle of numbers like a dial, from 0 to 9. The den mushi was sleeping at this time, with 2 big eyes closed. Ian took it over, poked it curiously, but found that he could not wake it up. This is a young den mushi. Kuma said, take it with you, and when it grows up, it will become yours. So amazing? Ian carefully held the little pink guy and asked, can it make calls when it grows up? After growing up, there will be a number on the shell, that is your number. Kuma said. This was the first time Ian heard him say so much. This is the iPhone XS of the pirate world, isn't it? When it grows up, it will become an iPhone XS. Ian was so excited. He didn't expect that Kuma would give him a den mushi as a gift. He couldn't help saying, thank you, Uncle Kuma. As soon as he said that, Ian knew that he made a mistake. Bartholomew Kuma, he did not introduce himself to Ian. To be precise, among the members of the Revolutionary Army, Ian should know only the name of Ivankov. Sure enough, after calling him Uncle Kuma, Kuma suddenly became silent and looked at Ian without speaking. Fortunately, Ian was quick-witted and knave. Uncle Kuma, Kuma means bear, can I call you that? I like your hat. It's like a bear. When Kuma entered the dojo, he had already taken off his cloak. Now Kuma was wearing his black and white bear cap, which was used as an excuse to call him Uncle Kuma. After hearing Ian's words, Kuma turned his head and stopped looking at him. Just as Ian was quietly relieved, Kuma made an action that he could never have imagined. He took off his bear's ear cap and fastened it on Ian's head. If you like, give it to you. P.S. He sometimes talks strangely. At this moment, Ian was so confused. What the hell is it? Chapter 12, Dragon and Sabo. Ian didn't know what Kuma thought and why he gave him his hat, but this silent man has always been incomprehensible for Ian, and he didn't know what he was thinking about. Kuma went out, and Ian took the bear's ear cap on his head and looked at this cute cap in his hand. Ian felt like something was stuck in his throat and didn't know how to spit it out. What the hell, do people in this world like to give hats so much? He didn't know what would he looks like wearing this hat. Ian imagined it and suddenly felt drowned with embarrassment. But he also knows that Kuma may be more kind to him. If the Den Den Mushi was a gift for the dojo's food, then this hat should be his personal thank you gift. As a last resort, Ian had to wear this bear's ear cap. When he returned to the dojo, Ian heard a burst of laughter from the inside, which made him very surprised. It was impossible to imagine that the more traditional man like Master Koshiro could get on with Ivankov. Walking in, Ian said to Koshiro, "Sensei, it's done. So, we have to leave." Ivankov stood up from the ground and put on a hood again, covering his explosive purple head. So do Kuma and the other Revolutionary Army soldiers, who have once again covered themselves up tightly. Koshiro was looking at the hat on Ian's head in surprise. When he heard Ivankov's words, he came back and asked, "Will you stay a little longer?" "No, it's not good to stay in the village for a long time." Ivankov said, "We will go to the beach and wait for the ship to arrive." Koshiro nodded and said to Ian, "Ian, send them off." "All right." In fact, he didn't need Koshiro to say it, Ian also decided to do so. Ivankov said that they would go to the beach and wait for their ship. Dragon must be there, so Ian wanted to go with them and see him. Ian led the way out of the dojo, Ivankov and Kuma followed, while the revolutionary soldiers bowed respectfully to Koshiro before they came out. Watching the people leaving, the dojo became empty, and Koshiro sat down and did not say a word. No one knows what he was thinking. Along the way, all the revolutionary soldiers, including Eva, looked at the cute bear's ear cap sprouting on Ian's head in some surprise. They naturally knew that it was Kuma's hat. They were surprised that Kuma would give his own hat to someone else. But even Ivankov didn't ask what was going on when he looked at Kuma, who wasn't wearing his hat at the moment. They just stared at Ian intensely. Feeling the burning sight behind him, Ian only felt itchy all over, so at this time, he didn't take them around in circles, he went straight to the beach, and soon they went out of the village. The revolutionary soldier who fought with Ian scratched his head and said strangely, "Hi. It seems that we arrived so fast, not like when we came." Ian looked back at him with a severe look and said, "Nah, your delusion." "Really?" The revolutionary soldier was also a little insecure. "Yeah." Ian nodded with certainty, "You're probably hungry. So it was an illusion." Ivankov saw this scene, laughed happily and said, "What a good boy." Ian shrugged his shoulders, and he knew that the detours could not be concealed from Ivankov and Kuma. But who made him look like a child now? Children's pranks would be forgiven, wouldn't they? Frost Moon Village is not a big village, and the population is not very large. When Ian brought people to the beach, he could see a few small fishing boats tied to the beach, which was left by the fishermen who went to the village. It was already afternoon. These fishermen had already returned from work, so the beach seemed quiet. Ivankov and his group came here, they weren't afraid of being seen. According to the timeline, the Revolutionary Army at this time were still in the stage of accumulating strength, so it was best for them to act in a low-key way and not be seen as much as possible. Until it was dark, no ship had come, but fortunately, Kuma took some revolutionary soldiers and found the food that has been flown by his technique. A group of people cooked a pot of rice on the beach, then caught some fish on the shore, and cooked them. So they ate, and Ian wasn't nervous following them. The moon had risen in the sky, and Ian began to yawn. Suddenly, he heard a revolutionary soldier standing at a high place shouting, "Here they are!" Ian quickly got up and looked in the distance. In the night, a dark shadow on the sea was coming in their direction. As time went by, the shadow grew larger and larger, and it was not until it came near that Ian could see the outline of the ship in the moonlight. It was a huge three-mast sailing boat, but the bow of the ship was a dragon head. The dragon body just supported the whole boat as a keel, and then a dragon tail appeared at the stern, making the ship look as if it was supported by a dragon. This was undoubtedly Dragon's ship. A Revolutionary Army soldier, who had already signaled to the ship with a light, Dragon's ship slowed down and approached the shore. "Eva-kun, can I go up and have a look?" Ian pulled Ivankov's cloak and pretended to be naive. "I haven't seen such a big ship yet." Ivankov did expect such a request from Ian. In fact, when Ian was waiting with them, Ivankov guessed that Ian wanted to see their ship and said, "Hi Haa." "Ian little candy. It's okay to go up and take a look, but let me say it first, I can't take you with me. So after that, you have to get off the boat and go back, okay?" "No problem." Ian nodded. When the dragon boat stopped, a pulling boat was laid down from the left side of the hull. Ivankov and Kuma started to board along the pulling boat, and Ian followed closely. The remaining Revolutionary Army soldier began to call on the boat for some hands to carry the food. Upon boarding the ship, Ivankov yelled, "The action is too slow. Dragon! How much are we going to wait?" Ian followed Ivankov with his tall body. He poked his head out, looking forward, only to see a figure in the same green cloak slowly turning around on the deck. Under the moonlight, Dragon was still wearing his hood, which prevented Ian from seeing his face clearly. "Sorry." Dragon spoke, his voice sounding low, "Something has delayed us, we had to save a child." As he turned around, he revealed a child lying on the deck behind him, and Ian saw at first glance the thick bandages wrapped around him. The bandage not only wrapped around the child's whole body but also around his head and face. He was in a fainting state with his mouth wide open. The black burn marks could be seen in the bandage gap. Under the bleak moonlight, the blood beneath the bandage was so dazzling. Even Ian shivered when he saw the child. He was frightened by the child's injuries. Needless to say, this kid must be Sabo, who was rescued from the sea by Dragon. When they really saw Sabo's tragedy at the moment, even Ian couldn't help but feel angry. What a cruel heart would lay such a heavy hand on a little child. If it wasn't for Dragon to happen to save Sabo, it might be the end for Sabo. At this moment, Ian really realized for the first time how cruel the celestial dragons were. Ivankov naturally saw Sabo lying on the deck, and jumped over in surprise and squatted down to look at him. "This is too serious. Hey, come and help me deal with his wounds," Ivankov shouted. "Ivan, can you heal him?" asked Dragon. "No, the child is too young. He needs special treatment," Ivankov said. "I can only hold him alive. Let's rush him to treatment." After that, Ivankov took off his gloves and thrust his fingers into Sabo's body. Healing hormone, adrenaline. Sabo on the ground suddenly coughed and coughed. Ivankov saw it and said happily, "Very good, his heart is beating again." Several Revolutionary Army soldiers took the opportunity to lift Sabo on a stretcher and deliver him to the cabin. Ivankov raised his head and asked Dragon, "Who is this kid? Why did he suffer such a serious injury?" Dragon shook his head and said, "I don't know his name. He was attacked by the celestial dragons in that sad country." Really, Ivankov remained silent for a while. Just then, a voice suddenly came and said, "His name is Sabo." "Huh?" Dragon looked in the direction of the voice in a daze and saw another child standing on the deck. The person who made this noise was naturally Ian. "Who are you?" Dragon was curious. "Do you know this injured child?" At the same time, Dragon naturally saw Kuma's cap on Ian's head, and could not help looking in the direction of Kuma. Ian shook his head and said, "Just know his name." He knows very well that Sabo suffered such a serious injury this time. When he was injured, he would lose his memory and his own name. Ian mentioned his name just for the sake of being nicknamed by the people of the Revolutionary Army in the future. In fact, even if Ian does not mention it, the Revolutionary Army people will know his name from the things that Sabo carries. The reason why Ian speaks out was actually subconscious. Dragon looked at Eva. Eva rose his hands and said, "This is a child in the village's dojo, a boy with a great character. I took him on board to have a look of our ship. Is that right?" Dragon looked at Ian and said nothing, but turned to him and asked, "Where's the food?" A Revolutionary Army soldier replied, "The dojo in the village sent us some." "Well, get ready to sail." Dragon said, "Return to Baltigo." Ian saw him now and had no regrets in his heart. At this moment, hearing Dragon's words, he knew that he was ordering his deportation, and said, "I have to go back to the dojo." After that, he walked toward the side of the boat and did not take 2 steps. Suddenly he heard Dragon saying, "Eva, you send him off." Ivankov followed Ian and sent him off the boat. When they came to the shore, Ivankov said to Ian, "Ian, little Candy, you have seen us now, but you need to promise me to not tell anyone about us." "I understand, you are not ordinary people." Ian shrugged and said, "By the way, Uncle Kuma gave me a little den mushy. Can I have your number?" Ivankov was stunned and immediately responded, "Uncle Kuma? You call him that? What do you want my number for?" Ian nodded, "Because I might want something from you in the future." Chapter 13, Leaving. The Revolutionary Army's ship was offshore and sailing on the vast sea. Dragon stood at the bow of the boat and looked at the distance. At this moment, he had taken off his cloak, revealing his domineering long hair and a strange diamond pattern on his face. Hearing footsteps coming from behind, Dragon did not turn around. "Kuma?" Kuma stood behind him and did not speak. Dragon turned around and saw Kuma put on a new bear ear cap. He grinned and said, "There are still spares. Rarely do you give your beloved hat to a teenager you don't know. The Revolutionary Army needs more companions." Kuma opened his mouth and said in a low voice, "That was a very promising teenager. Maybe there will be another day to meet." "You're right." Dragon looked up at the night sky full of stars. "Keep accumulating strength. When the Revolutionary Army can be as many as the stars in the sky, we can set off a prairie fire. This process is very long. It will take more than 10 years or even decades. By that time, maybe we would have died of old age, and the rest will be passed to the younger generation." "Kuma, I'm going to let you do something." When Dragon sighed, he suddenly said to Kuma, "This may be difficult, but someone has to do it." Kuma did not speak, he just kept looking at Dragon. 11 years ago, Goldie Roger, the Pirate King, was executed in Logue Town in the East Blue. Dragon said, the world government was meant to deter the increasingly rampant pirates, but what Roger left behind before he died turned them upside down. Over the years, more and more pirates have appeared on the Grand Line. With the strength of the Marines alone, they're losing their minds. I've got information said that they're now discussing the 7 warlords of the sea, Shishibukai, and intend to use some great pirates to balance the pirates' world. This is a good opportunity. I want you to become a member of the Shishibukai. Is it intended to use Shishabukai's identity to seek information from the world government?" asked Kuma. "Yes, and if possible, you have to find a way to get in touch with someone." Dragon said solemnly, "Dr. Vegapunk. The world government's genius scientist. I care about him." Having said that, Dragon turned around, looked at the sea, and said, "At that time, you and the Revolutionary Army should have as little contact as possible. You should decide everything by yourself." "When will I leave?" Kuma asked after a moment of silence. "Soon, you will disembark in the middle of the journey. The Revolutionary Army can't help you. You can only rely on your own strength to take the position of Shishibukai alone." Dragon said, "Do you need to say goodbye to Eva?" "No need." Kuma finished, holding his book, turned back to the cabin, leaving Dragon alone, who continued to look at the sea in front of him. After sending away Ivankov and Kuma, Ian returned to the dojo in the moonlight. Zoro was also in the dojo at this time. He was holding a big stone while squatting and counting, 580, 581, 582. Not far from him was Kuina, who was holding a bamboo sword and constantly attacking the erected target. It was obvious that they had practiced for a long time and were covered in sweat. When Ian came back, Kuina greeted him from a distance and said, "Brother Ian, where have you been today? Why haven't I seen you all the time?" Zoro also put down the stone at this time, came over and stood with Kuina, saying, "Anaki, your dinner was eaten by me." Before the words were finished, Ian came to them, so both of them saw the bear's ear cap on Ian's head. Puff puff puff. Zoro couldn't help pointing to Ian's head and laughing loudly, Ha 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 ha. What a funny hat. Not only him but even Kuina, with an odd expression, who was supposed to laugh but not out loud, so she was strangled. Ian felt so embarrassed and hot. Kuina was forgiven, but that green algae stupid dared to laugh so loud. What the hell are you laughing at? Without thinking about it, Ian raised his hand and hammered his head. Ouch! Zoro's laughter immediately turned into a scream, and his head was swollen. Why did you hit me? Zoro said fiercely to Ian. He pointed to Kuina and said to Ian, didn't she laugh too? Ian stared at him. You were laughing aloud, so I hit you. Kuina couldn't help it anymore. She turned his face to cover her mouth and giggled. Damn! Zoro knows that this fairness is beyond his grasp. After laughing enough, Ian asked, where's our sensei? Kuina wiped her tears and said, I don't know. I haven't been in the dojo. Ian entered the dojo and turned around looking for Koshiro. He sent off the Revolutionary Army, and he had to tell him. He turned around all the dojo and didn't see him. Ian didn't know where to find him, but he eventually turned to the woods behind the dojo. Only then did Ian finally find Koshiro. However, at first sight of Master Koshiro, Ian knew that he shouldn't disturb him. Because Koshiro was sitting on his knees in front of a tombstone, motionless. Ian knows that this tombstone is the grave of Kuina's mother. Kuina's mother died shortly after she gave birth to her daughter. She did not remember what she looked like, let alone Kuina. In her usual conversation, Master Koshiro rarely mentioned her mother, but occasionally lamented that Kuina looked like her. Ian wondered why Master Koshiro would come to her grave at night to worship her. This was a very unusual act. Just thinking about it, Ian suddenly thought of Ivankov who had just left the island today. His heart suddenly moved. Was the abnormal behavior of Master Koshiro related to Ivankov's appearance? Why after did they show up, Master Koshiro come to her tomb in the middle of the night? Could it be said that Kuina's mother was actually related to the Revolutionary Army? Ian was shocked by the idea that came to his mind, but then when he contacted Master Koshiro's performance in the daytime today, he found that this conjecture was not impossible. Master Koshiro is very mysterious. No one knows his origin or his strength, but Ian knows his character very well and feels that he does not have the rebellious spirit of the Revolutionary Army. His character is incompatible with the Revolutionary Army. On the contrary, Ivankov knew Koshiro, and Koshiro greeted them with a smile, but they were so polite in their conversation. So the only relation Ian could think of between them was Kuina's mother. Perhaps Kuina's mother was a revolutionary soldier, or even a cadre, and should be the earliest members of the Revolutionary Army. Ivankov actually knew Kuina's mother, along with Master Koshiro. This can explain the attitude between them. Ian thought about it and felt it might be true, so he left quietly. If Master Koshiro did not say anything, he would not ask. Maybe there was something hidden in this matter. Moreover, it was not a good past. Ian would not like to uncover Master Koshiro's scars, just like if he did not see them. After returning to the dojo, Ian went to his room and looked at the little pink den mushi that Kuma gave him on the table. At this time, the little fellow had fallen asleep with his eyes closed. Ian wanted to tease him, but he couldn't do both, so he washed himself asleep. Ian tried to tease him, but he couldn't do it, so he washed himself and went to sleep. Late at night, the tranquil Frost Moon village looks peaceful under the moonlight. What happened in the daytime today is just a small interlude for this village. When the sun rises the next day and a new day comes, it will return to the track of the past. Chapter 14, The Vision of the World. The next day, Ian got up early and left some leaves and weeds for the little den mushi to eat. After that, Ian put on the bear's ear cap, called Zoro to start another day of exercise. Running around the village, he constantly corrected the direction of Zoro, the directional idiot, and then they finished running. They went to the forest on the mountain and began swinging their swords and doing strength exercises. After these exercises were completed, Ian found a rope, tied it to a stone, and hung it on a branch. He held the bamboo sword in his right hand and pushed the hanging stone forward with his left hand. Because of the pendulum principle, the stone swings back in the direction of Ian. He waited without a move, and when he saw that the stone was about to hit him, he tried to launch the flash skill. Then puff, Ian's face was hit straight by the stone. Shit! It hurts a lot. Ian covered his face and felt as if his nose had been bleeding. It felt sour and numb. Unexpectedly, it was difficult to launch, and the timing of this flash was really a problem. That's right, this is what Ian thought of. It's a great way to practice the flash skill. This skill is really powerful, but it has one drawback. It can only be used at the moment of an attack, but it can't be used on its own initiative. Ian now lacks an opponent, so he came up with this way to let the hanging stones hit him and simulate an enemy's attack. People will react subconsciously. When facing an attack, the first reaction would actually be to avoid it. If Ian wants to overcome the subconscious reaction brought by this fear, he must constantly train himself. When Ian got up, he wiped his nosebleed. Since the beginning, Zoro has been staring at Ian's movements. He didn't know what strange things was he doing. When he saw Ian bleeding from his nose when the stone hit him, he could not help but say, "Brother Ian, why didn't you avoid it? Did you become an idiot after you put on this hat?" At this time, Ian was raising his head to stop his bleeding. He said madly, "You little fart, I'm learning a sword skill." Hi! Zoro's eyes lit up, "A sword skill?" "Yes," Ian said, "a very powerful sword trick. Master Koshiro has never taught them any sword skills, whether it is Kuina or Ian or Zoro and even the other young disciples in the dojo. Every day they practiced basic swordsmanship. Master Koshiro said that the sword skills are derived from the foundation, which is reasonable, but it is undeniable that such basic exercises will be monotonous for a long time. That's why Zoro's eyes were shining. He thought that if he could learn such trick himself, he might win against Kuina. "Brother Ian, teach me." Zoro rushed forward and looked at Ian with a look of admiration. "I want to learn this swordsmanship too." "No." Ian shook his head and said, "You ate all my dinner yesterday. Then I'll leave you my meal for today, and you'll teach me." Zoro shouted. Ian himself has not mastered the flash skill yet, how could he teach others, but then he turned his eyes and asked, "Do you really want to learn?" "Yeah." Zoro nodded busily. "Actually, this skill recruits this thing," Ian said solemnly. "Everyone learns different sword skills, so I can't teach you, but..." "But what?" Zoro asked, tilting his head. "But there's no way out." Ian pointed to Kuma's ear cap on his head and said, "The way is to wear this hat. You see, it was only after I put on this hat that I began understanding this swordsmanship." When Zoro heard this, he immediately became dumbfounded. Ian felt a little smug. Zoro, the green algae stupid, laughed so loudly at his hat every time. "How can I be his big brother? Now, let's see who will laugh. Making a big reason for your behavior is the only way to fool a child." However, without waiting for Ian to finish, Zoro suddenly popped out a sentence, "I don't want, this hat looks so stupid." Hi! Ian's nosebleed spurted out, and he was actually squandered by Zoro. Without even thinking about it, Ian hammered him again. He found it a habit to beat Zoro now. Ignoring the screaming of the green algae stupid, Ian stood up and continued his practice. During the whole morning, Ian was hit by the stone, and he even didn't know how many times it struck him. His whole face has been tragic. During this period, the number of time that he successfully used the true flash was tiny. However, it wasn't without gain. Practicing the true flash, in fact, is exercising the basic concept of practice skills, because for starting the flash skill, it needs to consume the nin. In this process, the proficiency of the nin skills practice increased a little, not to mention, Ian also gradually felt the power of nin. After a night's rest, his nin value has recovered to full, 15 points. If he does not control it, he may use all his nin at once. So he tried to control the output of his nin, but he didn't expect it to be possible. It was entirely determined by his will, but it was easier to control. Through experiments, he found that the minimum energy value needed to launch the flash skill is actually 2 points. One was used to wrap around the sword, while the other was attached to his body. The instantaneous movement requires a strong explosive force of his muscles, and the nin plays a role in this. When a flash is launched successfully, Ian can achieve a higher swing speed than the usual due to the support of the nin, thus achieving an instantaneous counter-attack. If at this time, he wasn't holding a bamboo sword, but a real sword, then the high-speed swing of the sword will form a blade light, which is the origin of the flash name. Although he could control the output of the nin, it wasn't easy to perceive the timing of the shot. The stone is a stone after all. If it changes to be a real enemy, the opponent's attack may be quick or slow. It will be more difficult to control the timing of the shot, so Ian must continue exercising. Several times the flash skill was launched, and it quickly consumed all Ian's energy. He had to stop and sigh with regret. Now, one of the restrictions on his practice is the mind energy, and the other is the recovery speed of the Nen. If he could have more Nen value and recovery speed of mind energy, he could practice more on a short period. Although Zoro was also exercising himself, he has been watching Ian's movements since the beginning. When he saw Ian successfully launch the flash skill for the first time, the rope in his mouth unleashed, and the big stone fell off and almost hit his foot again. He opened his mouth wide in surprise, and did not expect that Ian really did the swordsmanship. Is wearing that silly hat really so powerful? Zoro thought about it. But the hat is really stupid. Zoro was so entangled. After seeing Ian stop, Zoro asked, "Brother Ian, do you want to cut that stone? It seems impossible." At this time, Ian was very tired, and his brain was aching. He knew that this was the after effect of exhaustion and of using all his Nen, but it was much better than yesterday. When he heard the question of Zoro, Ian shook his head and said, "What? Is it impossible to cut a stone? There are people in the world who can cut the steel." "Ah? Is there such a powerful person?" Zoro was astonished. "The world is vast. There is such kind of people." Ian answered him with a smile, then got up and said, "Let's go back to eat dinner." On their way back, Ian found himself soft and powerless, so he rode directly around Zoro's neck, let Zoro take him back to the dojo, and he named it, Reinforcement Training. Zoro, this idiot, actually believed it. With Ian on his shoulder, he ran back to the dojo. Even Kuina was shocked by the wound on Ian's face. She rushed to find some medicine to treat Ian. After she was done, Ian couldn't hold on any more, so he laid on his back in the dojo and fell asleep. What he didn't know was that, just for what he said to Zoro, someone could cut the steel off. After dinner, Zoro went to find Master Kojiro and asked him, Sensei, I heard that there are people in the world who can cut off the steel. Is this true?" Well. It's true." Master Kojiro nodded. Standing up, Master Kojiro took out a piece of paper and said, "Look at this paper carefully." Then he threw the paper into the air and took advantage of the fact that the paper had not yet fallen, so he drew his sword and chopped it off. Then the paper is still intact. "Master, you haven't cut it off at all." Zoro was speechless. "Listen Zoro, there are swordsmen who can cut everything in the world, and they can even cut the steel. Using just a swing of the sword." Master Kojiro smiled and said, "The strongest sword is to protect what you want to protect and cut off the strongest things that you want to cut off. For me, a swordsman that can cut everything off is not a swordsman. Do you understand?" Kojiro asked. Zoro looked at Kojiro foolishly. "Sensei, I want to be a swordsman who can cut everything off." There was a pea-sized sweat bead on Kojiro's forehead. "Zoro, did you understand what I just said?" Zoro certainly did not understand a word, but what Ian and Master Kojiro said made him have a vision of the outside world for the first time. "One day, I will definitely be able to go out to see those powerful people, I will." Chapter 15, 1 year later. Time passed in silence, so quiet that no one could be disturbed. In the twinkling of an eye, more than 10 months had passed. A group of young disciples sat in 2 rows on their knees and gazed at the 2 figures fighting fiercely. Needless to say, they were Zoro and Kuina that were in the duel. Ian was sitting aside at this time, watching the confrontation between them. It has been a year since Zoro had come to the dojo. Compared with the time when he first arrived, the stupid boy who was acting like a wild boar turned to a powerful notorious swordsman. No one in the dojo made a sound, they only heard the sound of the 2 kids' bamboo swords. Zoro and Kuina had already fought for more than 100 rounds, and both of them had put their best efforts into the fight. Every day Ian and Zoro exercised together. Ian was aware of Zoro's changes. From the beginning, Zoro was defeated by Kuina in 2 or 3 swings, and now the fight has not been divided for so long, which made Ian can't help but nod for Zoro secretly. Unfortunately, although Zoro became stronger, Kuina has always been stronger than him. Just when everyone thought they were going to fight for some time, Kuina suddenly bowed her head and stabbed him with both her hands holding the bamboo sword. When Zoro saw Kuina's action, he quickly tried to block it. But it was unexpected that Kuina's attack was a fake action. After attracting Zoro to reveal a gap, she directly hit his face with a large upper sword style. Another red mark appeared on Zoro's face. Kuina's move was really powerful. He had been beaten in his face more than once by her trick. 1 point. So far, Kuina wins. Master Sosuke shouted, 2000 wins and 0 loses. Ian sighed when he saw the winner. In the past year, Zoro challenged Kuina frequently. After every exercise, he felt that he had made some progress and it would undoubtedly come to this time. He fought her for 2000 times. On average, there were 5 or 6 duels a day. He really didn't know where he came up with such great tenacity. So many challenges, if he has won a few times, it would be okay, but he didn't win even once. Ian now knows a little about Zoro's thoughts. It's shameful to lose in a girl's hands, let alone to lose so many times. Damn it! Zoro trembled on the ground. Kuina pointed at Zoro with her bamboo sword and said playfully, "You are really weak, Zoro. How can you be so useless? Obviously, it's because you're a boy." The disciples in the dojo heard her and said, "Zoro is not weak. Besides our big brother Ian, he is among the strongest boys, he even can defeat adults." Kuina clearly heard it, turned to them, and said, "But he's still weaker than me. Even with 2 swords, this kid is still weak." After that, Kuina left the crowd and stepped out of the dojo. When Ian saw this scene, he could not help smiling. Kuina was still so strong. Every time she defeated him, she would stimulate him so much. No one knew what Zoro was thinking. He stood up in silence and patted the dust on his body. Master Koshiro came up to him and said, "You lost again, Zoro. It's clear that you are really stronger." Before Zoro spoke, Master Koshiro was surrounded by a group of younger disciples shouting, "Sensei! It's not because she's your daughter, you are secretly training her?" "Yeah, that's too lame." Master Koshiro waved his hand quickly, No, I won't do that." Zoro did become stronger, but Kuina is also getting stronger and stronger. At this time, Zoro, with the red print on his face, walked silently towards the door. Everyone looked at his back, and Master Koshiro called out to him. Unexpectedly, he calmly dropped a sentence, "I am going to wash my face." Then he went straight out. Koshiro sighed and said to Ian, "Go and see him." Ian nodded, and walked out to the well in the yard, only to see Zoro holding the water desperately pouring it on his head. "Damn, why can't I beat Kuina?" Zoro said to himself, then suddenly roared, Why? I'm going to be the strongest swordsman in the world. Why would that happen?" Ian watched him getting emotionally, so he did not go forward, he just hid behind the tree and looked at him. After a while of venting, Zoro finally calmed down, smeared the water on his face and said in secret, "I'm going to duel with her again tonight." After dinner that day, Master Koshiro and his brother Sosuke sat in their room drinking tea. During the conversation, it was inevitable to mention the confrontation between Zoro and Kuina in the daytime. It's only been a year since he started. Zoro's growth is amazing. Sosuke said, the amount of practice between him and Ian is unmatched to others, to say that this is certainly true, but still impossible to win against Kuina. After listening to this, Koshiro thought for a while and then said, "The female swordsman has a huge obstacle as far as the situation is concerned, I still can't let her inherit the dojo." In the past, Master Koshiro did not speak so plainly as he did today, even though he had some regrets. Perhaps it was because he and Sosuke were the only 2 people in the room that he finally spoke his mind. However, what he did not expect was that this sentence was just picked up by Kuina, who was looking for him. She was listening to him outside the door. "Father!" Kuina slammed open the door of the room. "Eavesdropping is not good, Kuina." Master Koshiro looked at her with a serious face. Kuina was forced to endure her anger, and she said to Koshiro, "Father, I will be the strongest swordsman in the world." Similar to Koshiro, this was the first time that Kuina officially expressed her dream in front of her father, hoping to be truly recognized by him. Unexpectedly, Master Koshiro was silent after a while and then whispered, "Kuina, girls can't be the strongest." Kuina had looked at her father in dismay. She had no idea that her father was still so stubborn. Her efforts had never been recognized by him. Without saying a word, Kuina turned away and left, until her figure sank into darkness, and her tears began to flow down. Was this too hurtful? Sosuke looked at Koshiro unbelievably. Why are you so unkind to Kuina? Koshiro sighed, lifted the cup in front of him and drank. After that he says, don't you think so? Ian. Ian came out from behind the tree. He had watched the whole scene, but he was discovered by Koshiro. He was not surprised. When he came to the door, Ian sat down and asked Koshiro puzzled, Sensei, why are you doing this? Why do you insist that girls can't be the strongest? Koshiro's smiling face disappeared, but instead, his expression turned into a frown. Then he said, do you know that Kuina not only looks like her mother but even her strong personality is exactly the same as her mother? I know her goal was to be the strongest swordsman in the world, but how could she be the strongest? Besides the physiological reasons, she has to constantly challenge stronger talented swordsmen. If anything happens to her, ill. I've lost her mother, and I don't want to lose my daughter. Koshiro looked up at the ceiling. I don't want her to be the strongest in the world. I just want her to grow up safely. Ian watched the tears appear at the corner of his eyes. The impact of this on Ian was actually huge because he finally found out that Master Koshiro was not as old-fashioned as he imagined. In the final analysis, he just doesn't want Kuina to leave him, not because girls can't be the strongest swordsman. This is a father's deepest love for his daughter. No one dares to say that Koshiro was wrong. In this case, Ian did not know what to say, so he stood up and said, Sensei, I'll go and see Kuina. Koshiro did not speak, this was his acquiescence to Ian's actions. Ian closed the door of the room and went out. He wanted to go out and look for Kuina, but he was surprised to see Kuina rushing to the warehouse from afar. Curiously, Ian followed her quietly. A moment later, Ian saw Kuina coming out of the warehouse, holding a sword in her hand. That was a real sword. Ian stayed in the dojo for so long, naturally knowing what Kuina was holding. It was the famous sword Wado Ikimonji. The sword has a pure white hilt with a circular hand guard. The sheath is painted white, and the type of the blade is a straight blade. Although it was stored in the warehouse, it was said that it is a relic left to Kuina by her mother. This was the sword that was belonging to Kuina. On such a night, Kuina unexpectedly took her sword out, and Ian could not help sighing. He knows what's going to happen next. He just felt a little surprised, thinking that his presence might have affected the development of the original storyline, but he didn't expect it was going to happen. Zoro and Kuina were still going to have their 2001 duel. Let's go and have a look. It's also the moment when they made their vows. Chapter 16, Demon in Your Heart. That night was a full moon night, the bright moonlight spread on the earth, making everything look so distinct. On the vast grassland outside the village, Zoro and Kuina stared at each other holding their swords. In the woods not far away, Ian kept watching the scene. The duel finally began. From Ian's point of view, the round moon just became the background of the duel. In the moonlight, the two figures were intertwined, chopping and attacking each other with their swords kept slashing in a rhythmic pattern that creates scenery of dancing blades, and there was a strange aesthetic feeling. However, this time the two talented kids in the duel understood that the battle was actually very dangerous. The bamboo sword was replaced by a real sharp sword. If they were not careful, they might get a serious wound or possible death. Perhaps it was because of this that the fight between the two has become more cautious and more serious. Fighting for dozens of rounds, Zoro has been panting. His greatest achievement was just cutting off a bunch of Kuina's hair. On the contrary, Kuina wasn't that tired. It's heavy to fight with two real swords, isn't it? Zoro. Kuina continued to stimulate him and said, you are still very weak indeed. Upon hearing her, Zoro screamed unconvinced and attacked Kuina, but she had deliberately provoked him. The floor revealed again. Kuina rushed over while lowering her body and made an upper blow, hitting Zoro's two swords and made them flew away. Suddenly he was thrown by the force, Zoro fell backward, and her sword turned around and plunged beside Zoro's ear. You lost again. 0 wins and 2001 defeat. Kuina laughed. Lying on the ground, Zoro muffled his face and growled, damn it! Damn it! He lost again. He was so unwilling to lose, and he was about to cry. However, Kuina looked at him in silence and suddenly said, I'm not willing to cry. Zoro took off his hands and looked over in surprise. He saw the tear in Kuina's eyes, and she was lonely and said, when a girl grows up, she will be weaker than a boy. Look at big brother Ian, you can see that he has not tried to compete with me for a long time. It's not that he doesn't want to, but that I don't want to compete with him, because I know that he may be stronger than me now. You too, Zoro. You'll soon catch up with me, too. Kuina looked up at the sky and tried not to let her tears fall. My father told me that girls can't be the strongest swordsman in the world. I understand, I've known that for a long time. Hey Zoro, because you're a boy I also want to be the strongest swordsman in the world, but Kuina put her hand on her chest. My chest is growing too. Zoro blushed when he saw this scene. If I could be a boy too. Kuina lowered her head, and her unwilling tears finally flowed down. Then Zoro was reluctant and shouted, don't whine when you've beaten me already. That's too mean. You're my goal. Whatever a man or woman, when I beat you one day, will you use this as an excuse? It seems that I did not win by my own strength. Wasn't I an idiot who worked so hard training? Zoro. Kuina looked at him in surprise. Stop saying that. Zoro went up to Kuina and said, promise me that one day it will be you or me, one of us, must become the strongest swordsman in the world. Let's compare and see who can be the one. Kuina looked at Zoro in a daze and found that his eyes were more serious than ever. Zoro reached out to her and motioned. Kuina smiled, wiped her tears from her eyes and muttered, you fool. You are so weak. However, she extended her hands and held Zoro tightly. Under the moonlit night, this scene seemed to have been frozen and became a beautiful picture. But Ian, far away in the woods, couldn't help covering his head and sighing, ah, this is youth. What does he mean with that sentence? He remembers that day running in the sunset, which was his lost memory of his youth. That's what he's talking about now, but here the sunset is replaced by the moon. But, you damn idiots, when you two made your goals, have you forgotten about me? As a bystander, Ian's mood was very complicated at this time. Zoro and Kuina have set their goals, but what about him? When he came to this world, he can't go back. Should he continue to live like this as a bystander? Ian was in a confused state, but then suddenly he found a figure walking towards him. After looking at it, Ian found that it was Kuina. Zoro didn't know when she had left him. Meanwhile, Kuina has found Ian, so she came over and said to him, have you seen it, big brother Ian? Ian nodded. Kuina smiled and pulled her hair around her ear, then said, is it my father who asked you to come over and find me? Don't worry. I'm fine. Ian looked at Kuina for a while and suddenly said, although you have made a pact with that idiot, are you still a little unwilling? Kuina kept silent and turned her head aside. Ian wasn't a fool like Zoro. Only he would simply think that an agreement would make Kuina happy. The limitation of her body makes it impossible for her to become the strongest. This is probably the demon in Kuina's heart. She has been bound by this idea, and her heart was not free, so what progress in her swordsmanship would she make? She knows very well that one day, she can only look up to Zoro and watch him defeat her so that she can feel the taste of the defeat. For Kuina's strong personality, the thought of such a picture would make her feel as uncomfortable as being needled. To say that in Frost Moon Village, who knows the most about Kuina, it must be Ian, even Master Koshiro can't be compared with him. That's why he was going to ask her such a sentence. Looking at Kuina's reaction, Ian sighed slightly and said, come with me. Ian took Kuina back to the dojo and went to his room. As Kuina watched curiously, Ian carefully picked up the Den Den Mushi sleeping on the table. After a year, this little Den Den Mushi has grown up. If it wasn't sleeping, she could see that its bean-sized eyes had become a bit of Ian's charm. The funniest thing was that there was a little bear ear cap on his head now. Looks so much like Ian. And on its shell, there is now another number, 9209, which was Ian's number. Brother Ian, what are you doing with the Den Den Mushi? Asked Kuina. Instead of answering her, Ian touched the Den Den Mushi's little head and said, Kuina, do you remember that time when you haven't seen me for the whole day, and when I appeared, I had this hat on my head? Kuina nodded, of course, she remembered. That's because a group of outsiders came to the village that day. Ian said, these people were the Revolutionary Army. They gave me the hat, and among them, there was a very strange person. Kuina listened quietly to Ian's story, but she heard him suddenly change the subject and say, have you ever heard of the devil fruit? My father once mentioned it to me, but I don't really believe it. Is there such a thing as devil fruit? Asked Kuina. Ian nodded and said, really, Frost Moon Village is very small, and the outside world is very big. This devil fruit really exists, and the strange person I want to talk about is a devil fruit user. His name is Ivankov. He has hormone fruit ability. Ian said, he has a strange ability to manipulate human hormones and become a man or a woman freely. Looking at Kuina, she had opened her mouth in surprise, and Ian laughed. And the most important thing is that his ability can be applied to other people. When she heard this, Kuina looked at Ian. She finally understood what Ian meant to say. Yes, I escorted them out of the village. Ian nodded. When I left, I got his number. Now that my Den Den Mushi has grown up, I can call him if you really want to be a boy, maybe you can talk to him, and he will help you. That's right, this was the real reason why Ian asked Ivankov for his number when he left. Looking at Kuina's silence, Ian sighed and said, although we are not brothers and sisters, I have always treated you as my real sister. You have a demon in your heart. If you don't set it free, it will be very difficult for you to strengthen your swordsmanship. I don't want to see you sinking because of this matter, so I can only help you by finding this strange way. It may be hard for you to accept, so everything depends on your personal wishes. If you want to be a boy, go to the sea and find Ivankov. If you don't want to, then go on like this all the time. Girls can't be the strongest, I don't believe that, even though it takes a lot of hard work, there is always hope. I have to think about it. Kuina stood up and walked towards the door. She seemed a little lost, and Ian's words had a significant impact on her. At the moment when she was about to close the door, Ian took off Kuma's cap from his head with his right hand and showed a sweet smile to Kuina, saying, remember, follow your heart. No matter what decision you make, I will support you. Thank you, Ani-san. You're welcome, who made me your brother. Chapter 17, The Accident. That night, Ian kept wondering what choice would Kuina make. In fact, even Ian could not imagine what it would be like if Kuina really became a boy. But when Ivankov left, Ian was making an attempt because he knew that if Kuina remained in Frost Moon Village, she's going to die. He was used to working hard in the field, then drinking warm water from Kuina's hands while showing him a gorgeous smile and getting used to the way Kuina bandaged him after every injury he gets from exercising. Ian could not accept the fact that her seemingly strong but gentle sister would disappear in front of his eyes. So in this period, the only thought that comes to his mind was, the butterfly effect. He wanted to try whether he could change this result by any means. The next day, just before Ian got up and had time to wash his face, Kuina came to him. The two sat down at the table. The Den Den Mushi had woke up at this time, and squatted toward Kuina. Kuina smiled and touched its big eyes, handed it a leaf, and kept watching it eating happily. Kuina, have you thought about it? Ian asked her after a while. Yes, I did. Kuina looked up at him. I can only say, thank you for your kindness, big brother Ian. I thought about it all night. Kuina covered her chest and said. Although I always thought, if I were a boy, it would be great so I could not be a disappointment to my father, be able to grow stronger without any restrictions, be recognized by my own father, and then inherit his dojo. But when you told me yesterday that there was such an opportunity in front of me, I hesitated. If I really become a boy, am I still me? Even if I can reach the world's strongest swordsman in the end, but is that swordsman still me, Kuina? I think of your words, big brother Ian. Kuina looked at Ian with a smile. From now on, I will not be obsessed with my gender anymore. Since my father said that girls can't be the strongest, I will prove to him that I can become the strongest swords user in the world. Ian looked at Kuina and found that her face was no longer confused and unwilling. Instead, she was firm and confident. Kuina was telling the truth, and she really got it out of her heart. Ha ha, ha ha. Ian suddenly burst out laughing. This was really his sister Kuina. She has such a strong personality. What's the big deal about her being a girl? I said that no matter what decision you make, I will support you. Ian laughed and said, now that you have decided to be the strongest swords user, you have to work hard. Well. Thank you, brother Ian. I've to go now. Kuina stood up and started leaving. Kuina. Ian stopped her, his face became very serious, and he said, we've dealt with that matter, but now, you have to promise me another thing. What? Kuina asked curiously. Don't go to any dangerous places. especially high places. Ian said, "You'd better practice with Zoro and me these days." "Why?" Kuina was puzzled. Ian could not explain to her, but said, "I can't tell you why. But I have a bad feeling." It was strange to hear that this was the reason, but she was a little reluctant to practice with Ian and Zoro. She said, "I don't want to train that fool, Zoro. Every time he sweats, he smells bad. I don't want to practice with him. I sweat and stink too." Ian said with a very low voice. "You're different, you are a loved one of Kuina." Kuina naughtily spat out her tongue, "Zoro is an opponent, with him, my cards will be seen by him." "All right." Ian saw that she really didn't want to, and she was reluctant. After all, Kuina was a girl, and she had begun growing up. She really could not stay with those two all the time. So he had to say, "Well, promise me not to go to any dangerous places, will you promise me that?" All right, I promise you that." Kuina waved and said, "Sayonara, I'm going to practice." Looking at Kuina humming and happily going out, Ian couldn't help but sigh. He was trying to get Kuina out to the sea to avoid her death, but unexpectedly, by mistake, he solved the biggest problem in Kuina's mind. Even Ian didn't know what to do. For the next 2 days, Ian kept an eye on Kuina. Every time he went out to exercise with Zoro, he rushed back as soon as possible until he confirmed that Kuina was unharmed. However, Ian couldn't keep Kuina in his sight for a long time. He could watch her for a while, and she shouldn't find out. So Ian thought of a way. He told his little brothers in the dojo that once they found out that Kuina was going to go to high places, they would try to stop her or run to tell him as soon as possible. Out of respect for Ian, the disciples in the dojo earnestly agreed to it. What surprised Ian most was how quickly things could come. On the morning of the third day, Ian and Zoro, carrying a young brother, ran around the village together, and then came to the usual exercise place in the back hill. Running with a kid on their shoulders was a trick Ian and Zoro came up with not long ago because running alone was no longer effective for both of them. After putting down the 2 younger boys and letting them go back by themselves, Ian and Zoro began their daily routine exercise. However, he didn't know why, when he watched Zoro do the stone-pulling exercises with his mouth, Ian suddenly had a feeling of uneasiness. At first, he didn't realize it, but he just felt a little restless. But when he saw the 2 brothers who had been up to the mountain with them have turned back again, Ian suddenly had a very strong heartbeat. "No!" Ian shouted and rushed down the hill. Zoro looked foolishly at Ian, who was rushing out. He didn't know what was going on and asked the 2 young brothers, "Why did you come back?" The 2 disciples, panting, clutched their knees and said, "Kuina's going up to the attic to find her sharpening stone." We thought of what brother Ian said and wanted to hold her back, but she said it was all right. We had to run to tell him. At both ends of the story, Ian ran down the hill, exerting all his efforts, but feeling that he was not fast enough, so he put his mind force on his legs and immediately soared. After a year of continuous exercise, he has gradually mastered the use of the nin, but because the value of the nin was still relatively small, nor could he reach the point of materialization, so he was still unable to simulate the true armed haki. Quickly rushed back to the dojo, Ian ran directly to the warehouse. Ian didn't even think about it. He ran straight into the door and rushed in. As the sawdust flew, Ian saw Kuina standing on the 2nd floor, seemingly intending to come down with a black whetstone in her hand. But at this moment, her foot suddenly slipped, she rolled and fell from mid-air. "Kuina!" Ian jumped and stretched out his hands toward the place where Kuina was going to fall, trying to catch her, but the distance was a little too far, causing his body to fall along with her. Originally, according to Kuina's fall posture, she was likely to fall on her cervical spine and cause a fracture and death, but at this time Ian's arms caught her, patted underneath her like a cushion. Kuina's whole body was fine, but her head was slammed heavily on the floor. As the dust settled, Ian felt Kuina's body soften in his arms, and in spite of the pain of her fall, he got up and held her in her hand to check her condition. But what made Ian relieved was that he found that she still has some heartbeats. Hurriedly picked her up, Ian rushed out of the warehouse, came to the dojo and shouted anxiously, "Sensei! Sensei Koshiro!" Koshiro heard that sound and found that Ian was holding the unconscious Kuina in his arms. He came in a hurry and asked, "What happened?" "Kuina fell from the attic. I caught her, but she hit her head on the ground." Ian carefully put her down on the floor of the dojo and said, Master Kojiro, take care of her. I'll call the doctor. All right. Kojiro said. Ian did not reply and ran out in a hurry. Frost Moon Village is very small. There is only one doctor in the whole village, and he was the kind of doctor who can only treat minor illnesses in peacetime. But Ian rushed to the doctor's house at this time, lifted him up, took the medicine box and rushed back to the dojo. At this time, Zoro and a group of little disciples were already in the dojo, waiting anxiously. The doctor was a white-bearded man. He looked at Kuina carefully with his glasses, then he shook his head and said to the concerned people, nothing's wrong with her body, but her head was smashed so hard, I don't know when she will wake up. What do you mean? Zoro was in a hurry. He grabbed the doctor and cried, do you mean that Kuina can't wake up? No, it's not that she won't wake up. I meant that I couldn't know when she will wake up. The doctor shook his head and said, it may take a few days, or it may be longer. When Ian listened to him, he was confused. How could this happen? Although due to his intervention, Kuina avoided her death's fate, she is now likely to fall into a prolonged coma. Is fate making such a joke? Chapter 18, Pit of Money. Finally, after treating the bruises on Kuina's body and head, the doctor left, and his medical skills were powerless for a patient with such a strong concussion. In the dojo, a group of young disciples surrounded Kuina. Several ones had already cried out, Master Kojiro said something, and finally, he persuaded them to go home. After the bunch of reluctance, the children had finally felt, only Ian and Zoro remained at Kuina's side. Master Kojiro came in and said to them, thank you for taking care of her. Go and have a rest. I'll stay with her. No. Zoro gritted his teeth and said, I'm waiting for her to wake up. But Ian thought for a moment and said to Kojiro, Sensei, excuse me. I'm going to my room. Without waiting for Kojiro to nod, Ian hurried back to his room. Apart from eating, the den mushi was dozing off most of the time, but when Ian picked up the shell on its back, it suddenly came to its spirit and opened its big eyes wide. Ian dialed the number of Ivankov, and the den mushi immediately made a puru sound, as if waiting for a call. It didn't take long before the other side was finally connected, and Ian's den mushi suddenly became the appearance of Ivankov, with long eyelashes on its big eyes and purple lipstick on its lips. This scene was quite magical, but Ian didn't care much. Iva's voice came over the den mushi, hee-haw. Who is calling? Is it you, Kuma? No wonder why Ivankov made such a wrong guess. It was estimated that the den mushi of Ivankov would simulate Ian's appearance. In other words, it simulates the original appearance of Ian's den mushi, and Ian has been wearing Kuma's ear cap. Ivankov did not think of it and mistook Ian with Kuma. Not Kuma, it's me, Ian. Ian said. The den mushi on the desk was stunned and simulated Ivankov's expression. It turned out to be you, Ian Little Candy. I haven't seen you for a long time. I didn't expect you to call me. Eva, stop gossiping. Ian said urgently, on the boat that day, I saw you giving Sabo first aid. You should be a doctor, right? Something happened to Kuina in the dojo. You have to help me. Kuina? Ivankov doubted for a moment, and then suddenly said, is she Mr. Kojiro's daughter? What's wrong with her? Ian told him the story and said, where are you now? Can you come back to Frost Moon Village? I'm sorry, Ian boy. Ivankov said regretfully. I'm in the Kamabaka Kingdom now. It's on the Grand Line. I don't know how long it will take me to get there. As soon as Ian listened, his heart sank. But don't worry. Ivankov suddenly changed his tone, I know her situation as you said. Kuina, the little candy, has no trauma, so it is estimated that there is congestion in her skull, which leads to her coma. Although I can't come, I can tell you what medication to use. Ah, that's great. Tell me, I'll write it down. Ian hurried to find a pen and paper. When Ivankov told Ian about the drugs he was going to use, he went on to say, one more thing, Ian boy, you should pay attention, the drugs can only be auxiliary, even if they can dispel the congestion in her skull, but they do not necessarily wake her up. The doctor in your village is right. Whether she can wake up is unknown. What should I do? Ian hurriedly asked. It can only be stimulated by external forces. Ivankov thought for a moment and said, you should casually talk to her more in your free time. Soon, the consultation was over. Although Ian contacted the Dr. Ivankov, as he said, the only way she could wake up is if God wills it. Late at night, Ian and Zoro were still guarding Kuina, the medicine that Ivankov ordered, had commissioned the teacher Sosuke to look for it in a nearby town. How could this be? Zoro was still muttering, weren't you fine yesterday? As soon as you made a deal with me, you... Master Koshiro knelt opposite and whispered to Zoro, Zoro, sometimes people are very vulnerable. Sensei. What if she can't wake up, what should I do? Zoro rubbed his eyes and asked Koshiro. You have to believe in her. Koshiro smiled slightly and said, Kuina is a strong child. She won't be defeated like that. But you, Zoro. If she wakes up and finds that you have not progressed, she'll probably make fun of you. This period, who has a mind to practice? Zoro said. You can't say that. Koshiro said, didn't you make a deal with her? Don't you want to surprise her when she wakes up? Zoro stared at Kuina's face while she was laying on the ground. After a while, he nodded and said, I see, I'll go and train hard. Koshiro nodded gratefully. Ian was on the side and had not spoken. He was checking the system in his mind. According to Ivankov, for the case of Kuina, simple medical skills do not have much effect, so he wanted to find out if there were any cards with mental skills in the card system. After more than a year in this world, Ian saved enough time to draw 3 more times besides drawing his first card Samanosuke Akaki. However, these 3 draws made Ian understand how helpless those pay-to-win games for a player who doesn't recharge. The free draw in the card store does not mean that he can get a character card every time he draws, it just has a little chance. Because there are other items in the process of card drawing. Among the 3 draw cards in the back, Ian first got 5 advanced stones, the second one was a green general-purpose cloth, and the third time, it was better, finally a character, but it turned out to be a fragment. 2 fragments of Nakoruru from the game Samurai Showdown. Nakoruru is a 2-star card, and it takes 20 card fragments to synthesize a complete card. In the card store, there are so many cards, and it takes a whole 3 months to draw once. When will it be possible to collect the remaining 18 fragments of Nakoruru? And after asking the system, Ian found a bad thing about 1-star cards and 2-star cards. According to the system, any card is qualified. The 1-star and 2-star cards have the lowest qualifications, followed by 3-star and 4-star card, and the highest 5-star card. It should be noted that this refers to the original card. In other words, the qualification of the original 5-star red card is the highest. Even if a 4-star card goes through a variety of breakthroughs to the 5-star card, the qualification will be worse than the original 5-star card. Qualifications are growth, representing how many attribute values can be obtained per level of card promotion, which represents the improvement of the overall attribute when the card breaks through to +1, +2, +3, and because the final attribute of these cards is added to the host itself, it is also related to the growth of Ian himself. Even if the 1-star and 2-star card can eventually be upgraded to a 5-star card, it will consume a lot of resources in the process, so the system does not recommend Ian to cultivate them. The most important use of this type of card is to add up to the high-star cards, and at the same time, it can be decomposed to obtain souls. Souls can buy card fragments they want in the exclusive soul store. The card that is really worth cultivating should start at least from the 3-star card. The odds of getting the whole card are very low when the time is accumulated for a single extraction, so he can only rely on 10 consecutive draws. It is said that the odds are higher, but if Ian wants to make the 10 consecutive draws, he must have enough money to recharge. Ian was somewhat lucky. Fortunately, when he came to this world, he found that he has a system supporting him to survive, but unfortunately, this system is a bottomless pit of money. All of this is counted, but what makes Ian complain was that most of the functions of the system are all complete, the only error is the plot part. Anyone who has played a card game knows that card games have almost a fixed pattern, that is to say, the plot, commonly known as the deduction map. When a chapter is finished, the players will be given the opportunity to open the treasure box according to the number of stars they get. The treasure box will usually have diamond rewards, which is the main source of diamonds for non-recharger players. However, this damn system did not have any plot illustration at all and sent Ian with an unknown error. In other words, if Ian wants diamonds to draw cards, then he must recharge, and that is the only way. When faced with this kind of demonic card game that seems to be always hungry for money, and when it comes to this seemingly expensive situation, Ian can only say that it hurts. Systems, is there any character card that has mental strength or spiritual power? Ian asked. Yes. The system responded simply. Oh. Ian was overjoyed. He asked, who are these characters? How many stars do they have? Card character, Yuri. 4-star orange class card. Card character, Blade Queen Kerrigan, 5-star red class card. Just listening to the system listing 2 names, Ian's heart was cold, and he instantly understood, this kind of character card with mental strength, are almost all of the high-level rare cards. It was not what he could get at this stage. Chapter 19, Wearing a hat won't make you strong enough. Let's say that Ian has the money to draw cards, whether he would draw cards was another matter. Because the system said, all the cards he would draw will have a high priority of matching with the host skills. In other words, according to the swordsmanship skills Ian has learned now, when he draws cards, he will have a higher chance to draw character cards which are users of the sword, and a smaller chance on the other type of cards. Ian sighed. It seems that he could not help her now. Whether Kuina could wake up or not depended only on herself. Looking back, Ian watched Zoro still staring at Kuina, wondering what he was thinking. Master Koshiro had already left to rest. Let's go. Ian patted Zoro's shoulder and said, we should not stay like this, let's wait for Master Sosuke to come back with the medicine, and then we'll come back for her. Zoro looked up and said, Brother Ian, will you still practice with me tomorrow? Of course. Ian nodded and said, what's wrong? Zoro stood up, clenched his fist, and said, Master Koshiro is right. Even if Kuina can't wake up now, my agreement with her is still there. I don't want her to wake up and find that I wasted a lot of time. I have to work harder than ever to become the strongest swordsman in the world. Ian wanted to say something to Zoro, but what he didn't expect was that at this time, the corner of his eyes caught a slight movement of Kuina while she was lying down. So he immediately turned his head and saw that Kuina's eyelids seemed to move twice. For a moment, Ian called out in surprise, hurriedly went over and whispered, Kuina? Kuina? After shouting twice, Ian found that Kuina did not wake up. He had some doubts. He had heard that when people were dreaming, their eyelids would indeed move. Could it be that Kuina was dreaming? But why hasn't it moved before? Ian looked up at Zoro, as if is it because what the idiot just said now triggered Kuina's reaction? What happened to you, brother Ian? Zoro did not know what was going on. He asked curiously, why did you suddenly shout for Kuina? She can't hear you. Zoro, repeat what you said just now. Ian ignored him and commanded him directly. Why? Just do it. Ian wasn't in a good mood. And why was this fool talking so much at this time? So Zoro had to repeat it again. This time, Ian stared into Kuina's eyes tightly. At first, Zoro's words did not stimulate her. But in the end, when Zoro uttered the phrase become the strongest swordsman in the world, Ian suddenly found that Kuina's eyelids actually moved twice. That's the sentence. Ian patted his thigh excitedly. What Ivankov said was true. The external stimulation would indeed affect Kuina. As for what Zoro said, Ian found it not difficult to understand. It seemed to become the strongest swordsman in the world was Kuina's obsession. Even if she was in a coma, her subconscious still remember this idea. Obviously, Zoro also saw Kuina's reaction this time, although it was very slight, it was indeed observed, and even Zoro was happy for a while. Effective. Brother Ian, it really works. Zoro pulled Ian's sleeve and said excitedly, it looks like Kuina could really wake up. Ian grabbed Zoro's neck with his arm, drilled his fist on his green algae head twice, and said, it appears that you idiot, is really useful. Zoro smiled slightly, and at this time, he did not mind Ian's bullying him. Remember, you have to come and say these few words to Kuina every day in the future. Ian told him, and be sure to mention this sentence, no matter how long it takes, until the day when Kuina wakes up. All right. Zoro nodded solemnly. So, in the following days, they began their routine exercises as usual, which seems to be influenced by Kuina's persistence. Both Ian and Zoro worked harder and harder. Under the advice of Master Koshiro, they have changed into real swords to practice. Ian was holding an ordinary samurai sword, which was made by the blacksmith in the village. The workmanship and materials were not that good, but in terms of weight and handle, it can achieve the purpose of practice. Pushing the stone hanging from the branch so hard that it swung back at a faster rate, while Ian was holding the sword, staring at the stone swinging back. When the stone was about to hit him, Ian moved, and he quickly placed his long sword in front of him. The crisp sound dang came out, the stone hit the sword, causing Ian's body to be slightly shocked. Then the next second, Ian moved quickly. With the strength of the moment when the parry succeeded, Ian pulled his sword in an arc shape, from bottom to top, and swung it violently. Shua! Quickly the blade cut the air, making a slight noise and leaving a black scratch in sight. The stone that swung over, under this fast attack, was cut open from the middle, turned into two halves and fell on the ground behind Ian. Who? Ian sighed and turned to look at the smooth-cut stone surface. Ian knew that his blow had finally been launched successfully. After more than a year of persistent sword practice every day, Ian's swordsmanship proficiency has finally increased to 1 million, and successfully advanced to intermediate swordsmanship. After he reached the intermediate level, Ian has become able to use another skill of Sa Monosuk Akakis card, Bullet Flash. Compared to the previous True Flash, the launch of the Bullet Flash was relatively simple. It's about launching at the moment when the opponent is attacked. At the same time, Ian found that after he advanced to intermediate swordsmanship, he could choose to freely launch the Bullet Flash in any position. As he had just done, his Bodis residual remained motionless, concentrating all his nen on the sword, and the chop that he had just made could even cut the stone. Of course, this stone was not that hard of a material. If it were replaced by granite, Ian would not be able to cut it off, yet. It's just that looking at the sword in his hand, Ian found that after this cut, a slight crack appeared on the edge of the sword. Such a sword was estimated to be damaged only after several combats and a lot of practice time. Did you actually split open that stone? Zoro stared at Ian in a daze. Is really wearing that hat makes you this powerful? What do you say? Ian said with a smile. But it's still stupid, Zoro said. Ian was too lazy to beat him. The bear boy just couldn't talk. Wait for me. Zoro seemed to think of something, turned and ran down the hill. After a while, he came back panting, holding a black square scarf in his hand. Then, without waiting for Ian to say a word, he put his scarf on his head and tied a knot behind his head covering his green algae head. How about it? This is my cap. Zoro stood proudly holding his waist and said, now can I also understand that swordsmanship? After that, the little fellow waved his sword twice and said, ah, it's really different. There's a wonderful feeling that everything around you is getting dark. Is this the higher state of swordsmanship? What higher state of swordsmanship are you talking about? That is your black scarf covering your eyes? This psychological hint was really outrageous enough. However, the most irritating thing for Ian was that this fool would rather wear a square scarf casually than his hat. Does his bear ear hat really cast a great psychological shadow on him? The bear ear hat is very cute. Watching Zoro feel good about himself, he embarked on his path of understanding swordsmanship. Ian turned his eyes, squatted down and looked at Zoro, and said, well, is it better to wear a cap? Not bad. Zoro nodded with satisfaction. Ian raised his index finger and shook him, you probably don't know, wearing a hat is not the best way to get tough. Oh? Zoro widened his eyes. What? There are other methods to become more powerful? Baldness. Ian said solemnly, if your head goes bald, that's awesome. You'll straight become invincible. Really? Zoro looked at him unbelievably. Truer than pearls. Ian said, invincible. Whatever the enemy is, you will defeat him with one punch. Zoro thought foolishly for a while, then suddenly became angry and said, but damn it. You think I'm a kid, you're a liar? How could there be such a person? Ian laughed and felt that Zoro's expression made him so happy. He almost believed it just now. Ian's face was red with laughter, and Zoro couldn't help it anymore. He rushed over to Ian with his sword, damn you. Let's fight it out. Ian stopped Zoro's chopping, smiled, and said, well, before Kuina wakes up, let me be your opponent. But you have to be careful, I can beat people more powerful than Kuina. Subsequently, on the back hill of Frost Moon Village, there were two figures fighting behind. Chapter 20, To the Sea. Ian and Zoro, who had always believed that Kuina would wake up, did not expect it to take so long. Time flies, and in the blink of an eye, 6 years have passed. After all this time, Kuina was still unconscious. Apart from not being able to wake up, her body had kept growing. Lying on the ground, she became a slim beautiful girl. Because almost all the people in the dojo were men, Master Koshiro was insecure to let them take care of Kuina, so he specifically invited an aunt from the village to take care of her, feeding and grooming her every day. Every day, Ian and Zoro took time to talk to Kuina, especially Zoro, constantly saying how much they have become stronger every day, trying to stimulate her to wake up. However, they didn't know why she didn't wake up, maybe the intensity of the stimulation was not enough. Although her eyes would have some movements every time she hears this topic, she couldn't really wake up. Zoro worked harder and harder every day. It seemed that he wanted to use this way to alleviate the deep anxiety in his heart. He even took the Wado Ikimonji from Master Koshiro and began his Santorio path. He believed that since Kuina could not exercise now, it was up to him to keep going and reach their shared dream. What about Ian? Ian was sitting in the dojo at this time, face to face with Master Koshiro. In the past 6 years, Ian has gradually grown up. His long-term exercise has given him a straight and robust figure. Now he is 18 years old, 182 centimeters tall, with a long black hair, tied in a ponytail behind his head. His face is tranquil, and his mouth often shows a slight dashing smile, just like Master Koshiro. Over the years, the most influential person to Ian, of course, was Koshiro, who was a teacher and a father to him. So it was not surprising that he would almost resemble him. However, today's Koshiro also has a lot of white hair. Although his reception has been moderate as water, Kuina's situation still made him feel a little more anxious. Old teacups were filled with fresh hot water. The tea leaves were stretched out at a suitable temperature to form a beautiful green. Kuina was in a coma, and every day at noon, bringing the master's tea has become one of the things that Ian must do. When the teacup was lifted, the foam was blown gently. After Ian took a sip of tea, put the cup down and said, "Master, I want to go out to sea." For Ian's words, Koshiro was not surprised. He smiled and said, "If I remember correctly, that's what you said just 2 years ago." Indeed, he was anxious to say that Ian was not like Zoro. Even 2 years ago, Ian had wanted to go to sea to find a cure for Kuina, but at that time, Koshiro stopped him. The young man who had just turned 16 years old, wanted to go out alone to the sea, but Koshiro was absolutely not at ease with that. Now 2 years later, Ian had once again mentioned that old story. This time he has made a decision. Even if Koshiro objected, he wouldn't take it to account and would just do as he wishes. However, the strange thing was that Koshiro did not object after listening. He just sighed, "Ian, do you know? I've always regarded you as my real son. The reason why I didn't want Kuina to inherit the dojo was that besides being a girl, I actually wanted you to inherit the dojo." Ian didn't talk, he just kept looking quietly at Koshiro. "But over the years, I have seen clearly that your mind was not in Frost Moon Village." Koshiro continued, "A boy is a boy, even if your body was here, but your soul was yearning for the outside world." "Gomenasai, sorry, sensei." Ian bowed his head and apologized. "Don't say sorry." Koshiro laughed and said, "I know very well that in such an era, there is no power that would prevent a man from going to the sea, so if you want to go, I won't stop you from going." "Hi." Ian nodded. "Has the time been decided?" Koshiro asked. "Tomorrow." Ian says seriously. "So urgent?" Koshiro was somewhat surprised. "The sooner, the better." Ian smiled, "Kuina has been sleeping for so long, so I must go as fast as possible." Ian decided to go to the sea as soon as possible. First, he wanted to find a way to cure Kuina. Second, he wanted to try and see if he could find a devil fruit for her. In her unconscious situation, Kuina naturally can't exercise. With her strong personality, if she wakes up and sees that there was a large gap between her and Zoro, he was afraid she couldn't accept it anyway. Ian, who is her brother, naturally needs to consider for his sister. Devil fruit is undoubtedly the best way to become stronger, but he doesn't know if Kuina will accept it. In fact, in these 6 years, Ian also tried to contact Ivankov again, but strangely, he was unable to get in touch with him. Remembering what Ivankov said last time that he has some affairs in the Kamabaka kingdom, Ian suddenly recalled that in this timeline, Ivankov seems to have been arrested by the Marines. And with an unwarranted reason, he was imprisoned in the Impel Down. Ian could not count on him. Ian wanted to find a devil fruit for Kuina, Kojiro knew it, and Ian mentioned it to him before, but Kojiro didn't take it seriously. In his opinion, the devil fruit is evil. The only thing a swordsman can really rely on is his own sword. But this was Ian's good intentions. Kojiro would not object, but he asked, "What about the boat? How would you get a ship?" "I found Uncle Hull in the village. He will give his old fishing boat." Ian smiled and said, "Uncle Hull is a good man. He didn't want to accept my money, and he gave me a map of the nearby islands. The sea is unpredictable. You should be careful when you are alone," Kojiro warned him. For this, Ian was not worried. He was a child growing up at the seaside, so he was good with seawater. Even if he encounters wind and waves, he has the ability to protect himself. "Now that you have made up your mind, go ahead," Kojiro said. "I will leave you alone, I will not send you out." He didn't want to accompany him to the shore because he may not be able to bear the sadness brought by parting. Ian naturally understands this and says nothing. He just bent down, and gently touched the ground with his forehead, then got up and walked out of the dojo. The next day, in the seaside, Master Kojiro did not come, but there were still many people who came to see him before he leaves. Except for Zoro, all the other young teachers and disciples in the dojo came. These snotty children have grown up, their image improved a lot, and they looked more pleasant. "Brother Ian, remember to come back and see us." "Ian brother, we will miss you." The younger brothers surrounded Ian and shouted, "This has not changed much." The youngest one even cried. Although Ian is usually a black-bellied person, he often plays tricks on Zoro, such as fooling him, flicking him, hammering him, but he was very good to these young disciples. That's right, Kuina is in a coma, but he took over her responsibility of caring for these young disciples, and now Ian is going to the sea, so they were naturally reluctant to give him up. Ian patted them comfortably on the shoulder and felt some sigh in his heart. If it wasn't for his system, with his qualifications, it is estimated that he is now similar to these young disciples. Looking at them was like seeing himself before he was 10 years old. Feeling a gaze, Ian turned around and found Zoro standing by with his arms crossed. When Zoro first came to the dojo, he was almost 9 years old. He fought Kuina for a year, earning a record of 0 wins and 2001 loses. 6 years later, he was 16 years old. Now he already has the style of his well-known appearance, a green algae head was still so conspicuous. This guy's hair was long and shaved by his own sword, so it was messy like shit. He replaced his Kakaji with a short-sleeved t-shirt, and 3 long swords were placed on his waist. The only good thing was that he hadn't put on his earrings at that time. He was afraid that Master Kojiro would scold him. When Ian looked over, the fellow hummed, turned his head and ignored Ian. "Hey, kid." Ian couldn't help laughing and said, "You know that I don't want to go out without you, but I'm helpless." Zoro knew that Ian was going to the sea, so he insisted on going with Ian, but Master Kojiro refused. Just as Ian wasn't allowed to go to the sea much earlier, Master Kojiro was afraid that Zoro was too young. Ian naturally obeyed the words of Kojiro, so he refused the request of Zoro to travel together. For this reason, Zoro had been angry all night. When he came to him, Ian patted his shoulder and said, "You have to wait for a little longer. I'll go to the sea first to find a way to cure Kuina. If I haven't come back in 2 years, then you can go out to the sea on your own." "Wordy. You don't have to say it, I know that." Zoro turned his head away from Ian and said, "It's you. If Kuina wakes up during this time, don't blame me for saying bad things about you." "Ha! Say what you want." Ian winked at him. "Don't forget, I'm Kuina's brother, and you're her opponent. Who do you think shall believe?" After that, Ian pressed on his bare ear cap that was about to be blown up by the wind, and smiled, "Okay, I've to go now." "Wait." Zoro's voice came and stopped him. Then he reached him and handed over a long sword with a white scabbard. He twisted his head and said, "This is the Wado Ikimonji, you've got to take it with you." It was a tough thing to say, but was he really worried about him? Why else would he want to give him such a good sword? Ian smiled but did not take it. "No, this sword is not suitable for me. You should keep it. When Kuina wakes up, you should give it back to her." When he reached the shore, Ian untied the rope and threw it into the boat. Then he pushed the small fishing boat into the sea and then jumped in. "Goodbye, I'm leaving." Ian waved to the people on the shore. With the reluctant voices of the people, Ian picked up the oar and rowed the boat farther and farther into the distance till the boat was only a tiny speck before vanishing from their eyes. Then a sea king emerged and killed Ian. The end. Chapter 21, The First Big Gift Package? Ian chose a good day to sail the sea. It was a sunny day. In such a weather, the sky showed a deep blue color, with occasional drifting clouds that embellish the scene. Looking at the boundless sea, and feeling the gentle blow of the sea breeze, it makes people have a relaxed and happy feeling. As Ian became tired of paddling, he opened the small sails on the fishing boat and let the sea breeze take him forward. He laid back in the fishing boat, looking at the unknown birds flying in the sky while checking the system. Actually, choosing to go out to the sea wasn't only to find a way to cure Kuina, but also because he is now at the bottleneck. Opening the attribute interface of the system, you can see that Ian's current level, he is now level 5, this was the experience he has gained from 6 years of constant practice with Zoro in Frost Moon Village. Taking advantage of Zoro, Ian learned more about using his nin, and he spent more time training his swordsmanship than Zoro. In that long period, those two have fought a lot, and Ian has won most of the battles. The reason why the victories were more than defeats was that Zoro was indeed very talented. In these few years, he really began mastering his swordsmanship. Although at first, he was able to use only the Toragari, tiger hunting, and Ashibari, bull needles, Ian did feel the power of the nin on his swords. Of course, in the words of this world, it was the fluctuation of the haki. With these two moves, Zoro had gradually taken control of his inner strength, so for a time, even Ian could only match his 2 strokes. If he was not careful enough, he might be defeated by Zoro. Zoro's strength was a little enhanced. When Ian defeated him, he gained a bit more experience. It can be said that Ian has reached the current level, which was completely the contribution of Zoro's defeat. However, when Ian reached level 5, he found that even beating Zoro would not give him experience. The system seems unable to gain too much experience on the same opponent. Frost Moon Village is located on the island where there are no ferocious beasts and so on, which leads to the fact that he could not upgrade his level for 2 years, which was one of the reasons why he wanted to go out to the sea early 2 years ago, but he was prevented by Master Kojiro. It is estimated that in the system, the host Ian was also counted as a card, and according to the number of stars and qualifications, he should now be a 1-star green card, which can be seen from the attribute points obtained after his upgrade. For each level he upgrades, he gains +5 power and +5 speed. When he reached level 5, each one was increased by 20 points. This may be the qualification question mentioned in the system because when Ian raised the Samanosuke Akaki's card to level 5 with his experience book, he found that Samanosuke Akaki's card, a 3-star card, could gain 15 points of strength and speed, 20 points of life and nin per level of promotion. This card may be a balanced type, that is, the upgraded attributes have the same increase in strength and speed, which is a good reference for comparison. Ian also tried to ask the system to see if the host could use the advanced stone to enhance the number of stars and qualifications, but he was told that he could not and needed other special items. As for what special items he need, the system did not tell him. Though it was a little regrettable, but the system's answer was good, it gave a little hope to Ian. According to the 30% ratio, every level of the Samanosuke Akaki's card can bring him just 5 points of all attributes, so now Ian's attributes are as follows. Name, Ian. Level, 5. Doriki, power level 217. Strength, 82, base 5 plus upgrades 20 plus cards 35 plus self-exercise 22. Speed, 78, basic 5 plus upgrades 20 plus cards 35 plus self-workout 18. Vitality, 89, basic 10 plus upgrades 40 plus cards 39. Nin, mind force 99. Basic 0 plus upgrades 40 plus card 39 plus nin practice 20. Skills. Advanced swordsmanship. Swordsmanship speed plus 30%. Destructive power plus 30%. Proficiency, 10 million. Intermediate nin practice. Increase the number of restore per hour of the nin, current restore value, 5 points. Increase the total value of nin by 25%. Proficiency, 6811. Among the two skills that Ian now has, the 10 million proficiency of advanced swordsmanship was already full, but strangely, advanced swordsmanship can no longer be upgraded, which is the so-called bottleneck. Ian knows that there must be a higher level of swordsmanship, but he lacks insight and the opportunity to improve. However, the Nen practice was accumulated with his daily practice of swordsmanship. It was limited to the amount of the Nen, he could not improve as quickly as his proficiency in swordsmanship. So now, he was only at the intermediate level. However, after the improvement of the practice skills, he can increase the total number of Ian's Nen values by percentage. This was not a big surprise. Whether it is advanced swordsmanship or intermediate Nen practice, these two skills have an impact on Ian's Dora key value. Otherwise, with his current attribute value, it is impossible to have more than 200 Dora key value. Of course, it is said that it takes about 500 points to be called Superman. Ian has more than 200 Dora key values, which seems to be quite low, but this was not the case, because, in the long-term practice of swordsmanship, Ian found a strange thing, that was, when he consumes the Nen to use his flash skills, the value of his power level will change instantaneously. This change, of course, was rising, and according to the size of the Nen that Ian calls, the increase in the value of the Dora key was also different. For example, if he wraps his 99 Nen points in his sword and hits the bullet flash, his Dora key value in this instant get doubled at least. Because the flash skills are instantaneous, it was difficult for him to observe it carefully. Ian has also found this in an unexpected situation. After reading his attributes, Ian flipped into the card backpack and looked at the cards he had obtained. He can draw a free card every 100 days. In the past 6 years, Ian has drawn 21 cards altogether. Although the odds of such a single draw card are very small, but the number of times is too large, so it can still be done. In this 21 draw card, Ian has successively pulled out 3 complete cards. It is a good thing to have many cards, but the problem was that those cards were 1-star and 2-star, rando, 1-star green card, source, Yu Yu Hakusho, Shimura Shinpei, 1-star green card, source, Gintama, Jabu, 2 stars blue cards, source, Saint Seiya. When he drew these cards, Ian was confused. Although he knew that such low-level cards had no value to cultivate. After seeing their attributes and skills, he really understood why he shouldn't upgrade them. Even if their basic attributes were too low, they also had only one skill. Rando's card was still better. He has miniaturized spells, shrinking curse. Ian didn't know what kind of effect does it has. The most thing that made Ian speechless was that Shimura Shinpei's card has only one skill, make complaints. Also, there is the unicorn Jabu, who has come from a small universe, was he good or bad? But in the card attributes, unexpectedly it also has the same Nen attribute. So Ian understood that no matter what kind of cards were drawn from the system, their skills were classified according to the Nen. It seems that in the concept of the system, the Nen has unified the whole universe. Ian still has a card slot to use, but he doesn't want to waste it on these cards. The percentage of the bonus is low, and the basic attributes of the cards are so few. Even if these cards were equipped, the attributes bonus obtained is not the same. It's better to keep it for the first 10 consecutive draws and equip a 4-star orange card. After drifting for a long time in the sea, Ian was hungry, so he climbed up and opened his package. This parcel was a gift for Ian. There were a few clothes in it. Besides, there were some dry food enough for 3 days. Ian listened to Uncle Hull in the village, which told him that it would take him 3 days to get to the nearest island by boat, so he prepared this dry food. Taking out the dry food and a bottle of water, Ian sat on the boat and ate, but at this time, he found a small cloth bag in his package. He remembered that he hadn't put it in the package, so curiously, he picked it up and opened it. What didn't Ian expect was that this cloth bag turned out to be full with a stack of green bills in a white envelope. Ian counted the amount of money and found that they were a total of 20,000 berries. It was the first time that he had received so much money in his hand. Then he opened the envelope. Sure enough, there was a letter left by Master Koshiro. Although he did not come to see him off, Master Koshiro still kept thinking about him all the time. These 20,000 berries were all the current savings of Master Koshiro, and he gave them all to Ian for his journey. Ian was full of warmth. Although 20,000 berries was not much, what it represents is Master Koshiro's concern for him. Just as Ian sighed, he suddenly heard the voice coming from the system in his mind. Money detected, does the host want to recharge? With the first recharge, you can get the first big gift bag. Ian got surprised, and immediately said, recharge using all 20,000 berries. The system replied, you have 2 card draws available, would you like to draw cards? Ian was excited and said, system, draw a card. Ian received a card, but when he saw what it says, self-destruct button. Ian immediately panicked when the card suddenly self-activated, and he shouted, how did I get a UGIO card and why this card? Boom! Ian was blown to pieces, and the story ends in tragedy. Chapter 22, 8,888 Diamonds. First big gift package? Ian asked doubtfully, is that an extra reward given by the first recharge? Yes. The system replied, if you recharge any amount for the first time, you can get the first big gift bag worth 8,888 diamonds. Any amount? Ian was so mad. Why didn't you tell me about it sooner? Dang it! If he had known that there was such a big gift package, Ian would have recharged all of his money when he was in Frost Moon Village. At that time, although the monthly pocket money was pitiful, he still accumulated a few hundred berries. It was a very good deal to take this big gift package. However, the system replied, the lowest grade of diamond purchased in the store is 100 diamonds. Ian was speechless when he came up, and if it was possible, he only wanted to crush the system into a ball and kick it 10,000 times. This is what you call an arbitrary amount? You directly said that the lowest purchased must be 100 diamonds. Amazing bro! Nice game of words, system. Ian could only scream and swear at the system. No wonder why the system did not mention the first big gift package before, only when I held this amount of money in my hand. The minimum threshold for recharge is 100 diamonds, which is equivalent to all my 20,000 berries. Selectively, the system knew how much money Ian had, and then gave him a deal to persuade him to charge with all his money. This system is really savage. Forget it, Ian has long known that this pit money system is cancer. Ian was too lazy to complain, so he asked, what can I find in this package? Can't help asking, he has already understood the system's skill of the word games. Sure enough, he talks very well. But would this gift bag be really worth to about 8,888 diamonds? Everyone knows that opening a bag when you only recharge the bottom value won't be worth much. The package includes a fixed number of breakthrough stones, a fixed number of advanced stones, a fixed number of random 5-star red card fragments, and a random piece of exclusive treasure. The system responded. Ian squinted and asked, that's all? Is that worth 8,888 diamonds? The system didn't speak, it seemed to be the default, and then Ian suddenly felt that the whole thing was not good. He felt that he should not believe this system, more than 8,000 diamonds, which was almost equivalent to 20 million berries, but the items in the gift package did not sound like something worth so much money. Well, this is the usual bullshit advertisement of game makers. For them, this kind of gimmick is not even a false advertisement, because virtual goods are not worth estimating. You can't refute them at all if they say what they are worth. Should I do it? Ian looked at 20,000 berries in his hand with some hesitation. Frost Moon Village is very small, most of the people in the village are self-sufficient, the island's economic situation is naturally not developed. In addition, in these years Master Kojiro often purchased a lot of medicines for Kuina, his savings were certainly not much, giving out 20,000 berries to Ian was already the limit. Rather than buying diamonds, this amount was to help him in his journey. What is the situation after going to the sea? Ian still has no idea. It must be a better situation to carry money with him. But Ian doesn't know whether he has the ability to defend himself or not. He hasn't dealt with other enemies yet. Don't forget, this is the world of pirates, even in the weakest blue, the East Blue, it is said that the average bounty of a pirate group was 3 million berries. Ian did not have a clear understanding of the relation between the pirates' strength and their bounty, but out of cautious mind who doesn't want to make a mistake, it was certainly right to increase his strength by recharging for that gift package. So at this time, Ian found himself in a difficult situation and did not know how to choose. Why is it so unfortunate that it is exactly 20,000 berries? If it were a little more or a little less, Ian wouldn't have been so entangled. When he finished eating the dry food in his hand, Ian finally made a decision to recharge. Whatever it is about money, take one step at a time, but could he even get an opportunity to work and make money? On the contrary, the 5-star red card in the package made Ian very curious. When Ian made the decision, the money in his hand suddenly disappeared. It was collected by the system. Then Ian heard the voice of the system in his mind, "You bought 100 diamonds and got 10 extra diamonds as a gift. You have received a gift package." Ian focused on the system interface in his mind and saw a flashing gift pattern hanging there, so he chose to collect it. "You've got 100 breakthrough stones. You've got 100 advanced stones. You get 65-star red card fragments, Yamata no Orokai. You have acquired the exclusive treasure, Blade Master Longsword." Ian was stunned. Orokai? Is it really the Orokai? He rushed into his backpack interface and chose to look at the fragments of the existing cards. Sure enough, there was a handsome white-haired man's head there. The upper left corner of the avatar showed a fragmentation sign, indicating that the card was still in a state that could not be synthesized. On the right side, there was X60 indicating the number of fragments of the card. Ian suddenly got up. He is really the final boss of the King of Fighters 97. This is developed. According to the system, Oroka's card should be the original 5-star red card. Whether its qualifications or attributes are top-notch. If this card is cultivated, it will definitely bring a huge bonus to Ian. But now the card hasn't been fully synthesized. Ian couldn't see the skills of Orokai, but he believes it must be very powerful. This was the first top card Ian has ever seen. After enjoying it for a while, Ian asked the system, "Oh, yeah, how many fragments do Oroka's card needs to be synthesized?" The number of fragments needed to synthesize 5-star red cards is 180. The system responded. What the heck, what is the feeling of being pitted again? Before listening to the system, the number of fragments needed for a 3-star purple card is 30 pieces, so Ian also thought that the number for 4-star and 5-star cards would not be much more. He guessed that 5-star cards can be synthesized with up to 80 fragments. If that was the case, then with his 60 fragments, there would still be some hope for him to synthesize it. But now the system told him that it needs 180. Ian felt that he was scammed by the system. Only giving me the third of the fragments needed, and you dare to call it worth of 8,888 diamonds. Can't see. Can't use. What's the difference between this and getting nothing? Ian understands the meaning of the system very well. Gives him some fragments, not many, and attracts him to continue charging for the other fragments. This is a typical consumption trap. Yeah, it's not easy even for an occasional charger player. While stroking his chest, Ian comforted himself, "Don't think too much, get used to it, just get used to it. It's not worth it to be angry with the system, because it's useless to get angry. You can't even do anything to hurt the system even a bit, except to make yourself emotionally agitated and irritable." So Ian could only temporarily drop Oroka's fragments and switch to the backpack option to see the so-called exclusive treasure. "Hey? What was that sword you gave me?" When Ian saw the exclusive treasure in his backpack, he was surprised softly. Listening just to the name, he was not able to imagine what this exclusive treasure looks like because many games have the role of Blade Master. Ian does not know which one it will be, but when he saw the weapon, he recognized it for the first time. Because he was so familiar with this weapon. This was the sword of the Blade Master Samuro from World of Warcraft. And its color was the red version. Ian didn't know the name of this long sword. It seemed impossible to verify. That sword had a long hilt, and there was a round iron ring at the end of the handle. The slender body of the sword stretched out straight ahead. It looked quite long, but the blade was rusty red. There were some black and gold lines on it, but there was a snow-white color at the edge of the sword. Just by looking at it, Ian could feel the glaring sharpness of the sword. The whole long sword seems to have like a rough style. Ian knows that the red version of the sword was supposed to be used by a swordsman of Blackrock clan, but maybe even the system didn't know what swords do the Blackrock swordsman used, so it was arranged directly for Samuro. Blade Master Longsword. Card Samuro's exclusive treasure. Star, 3 stars treasure, upgradable. Strength plus 100. Speed plus 50. Destructive power plus 25%. Samuro. Very good attributes, but I don't have Samuro's card. Ian just felt that he had a bad start of a day, even when he got the gift package. But at least, there were some breakthrough stones in the pack, and none of the other things were useful for him now. Just when Ian was a little crazy, he suddenly heard the system saying, "The host can equip any card's exclusive treasure." Huh? Ian was stunned. "Can I use it?" "Yes, the host can be equipped with any card's exclusive treasure, but only one at a time," the system replied. So, holding on to the idea of trying, Ian switched to the side of his character. As a matter of fact, he saw an empty box showing a red dot in his attributes. This red dot wasn't unfamiliar to Ian. When Samanosuke Akaki's card was able to equip, it also showed that it meant something that could be equipped. Ian chose the small box, and there was the Blade Master Longsword in the pop-up item bar. After selecting equipment, Ian's attributes changed immediately, 30% attributes bonus was added. The strength value increased by 33 points, the speed increased by 15 points, and an additional destructive power attributes added by 7.5%. Before Ian finishes reading, he suddenly felt that his hands were pulled down. When he came back to take a look, he found that there was a weapon in his hands, which was the Blade Master Longsword that was just equipped. Ian bit his tongue directly. What was going on? After equipping the exclusive treasure, how did it appear in reality? Chapter 23, Starving. What is going on here? Ian stared at the Blade Master's sword in his hand. He thought it was incredible and quickly asked the system. The exclusive treasure can produce a materialized projection. The system explained, but the projection only has a percentage of the corresponding stars. Ian understands in seconds, that is to say, the Blade Master's sword in his hand does not achieve the full effect of the real weapon, does it? Looking at the sword in his hand, he found it was actually long enough. This weapon, which he didn't know whether it should be called a long sword or a huge knife, was originally the weapon of the orc swordsman in Warcraft. How tall the orcs are, how big they are, and how do the weapons that seem normal in their hands, changed to be quite huge in Ian's hands. This sword was almost as long as Ian's height. But in terms of its shape, there was nothing he could say. Although it looked rough, both the arc and the sharpness were from the top class. Just from seeing it, he could tell that this was a weapon made to kill. With a gentle swing of the blade, Ian heard the resonance of the blade, which showed that the blade was uniform in material and the weight of the whole sword was concentrated on the back of the blade, which made it especially suitable for slashing. According to Ian's understanding, this was a heavy sword that required both hands to hold. Originally, when Ian went to the sea, he was only carrying a rough sword. He spent so many years in the dojo and was deeply influenced by Master Koshiro. He felt that the most important thing for a swordsman was to have a good sword. So he felt sorry for the sword he brought out with him. Just when Ian was thinking about how to get a good weapon, the system sent him a very powerful sword to his door. Although this Blade Master Longsword was completely different from the samurai swords he usually uses, the principles of swordsmanship are the same. The Blade Master's Longsword was not only suitable for slashing, but also for straight stabbing and cross-cutting. As long as Ian gives a little time to adjust to its weight, there will be no problem. Well, that's all right. The key to its weight is it pulls the wind. Although it doesn't have a scabbard, he can always put this sword on his back, and pull it out whenever he wants, but it would need a huge force to do so. Like Ichigo. With the long sword in his hands, Ian tried to wave a few times. He was satisfied to hear the sound of the blade cutting through the air. He felt that this was the only thing in the package that didn't pit him. And the most comfortable thing for Ian was that this sword can also achieve the effect of disappearing instantly by removing the exclusive treasure in the equipment slot. After re-equipping, it will reappear again, just like a virtual equipment, very convenient. As the boat moved forward with the wind, Ian practiced waving the Blade Master Longsword on the boat. First, to adapt to using this sword as soon as possible. Secondly, because his habits of so many years have been maintained, the sword exercise has been like his instinct. If he catches the opportunity and does not practice for quite a time, he will feel sad. Unfortunately, concentration exercises often result in a lack of attention to other things. In the evening, the sea breeze became more violent, and air pressure began to decrease. People with a little common sense would understand that this was a sign of a storm in the sea. It was not until then that Ian finally regained consciousness and lifted his sails. The weather on the sea changed, and it was not long before Ian put up his sails. The storm came, and the strong wind began to blow his boat, picking up the big waves, and rushing toward the boat. At first Ian was worried about capsizing, so he sat in the middle of the boat wearing a raincoat, relying on his own strength to stabilize the boat, but after a long time, he had to stand up, pick up the bucket left in the fishing boat, and pour the seawater on the outside. How strong is a small fishing boat against this storm? Needless to say, everyone knows that experienced fishermen go fishing in the morning and come back in the evening, and they only stay near the coast. It can be said that Ian was totally affected by the anime he had seen before. Whether it was Luffy or Ace and Sabo, it seemed that they went to the sea in a small boat, which made him think that he could do it. But it wasn't until he really experienced traveling in the sea that Ian realized that he really despised the knowledge of navigation. Looking at it, all sides of the sea were dark and oppressive because of the gloomy weather. The sun in the sky was invisible, and there was no reference. Ian was not sure what direction he was heading. It was hard to hold on in the storm, but his clothes and dry food in the boat were all soaked by the seawater. The clothes were not a problem, because when the sun came out, it will dry them, but his foods were all gone. The next day, when the sun rose, Ian found that he had lost his way. When he set off, he was heading north. However, the position of the sun showed that he was actually heading west. He had no idea how far he was. Ah! When Ian discovered this, he couldn't help slapping his head. When he was still in Frost Moon Village, the most he said to Zoro was, "Don't believe your sense of direction. If you get lost, just stand still and wait for someone to save you." Ian didn't think he'd get lost now. Ian's geographical knowledge was very poor, but he also knows that he can't go further to the west, because there seem to be no islands in the west, and he will be closer and closer to the calm belt of the Grand Line. It's a gathering place for large sea kings, and Ian's small boat can't even get near the calm belt. So he had to adjust his direction and keep sailing north. However, deviating from the route means that Ian will stay longer at sea, and his dry food has already been rotten. If he wants to eat, he can only rely on the sea. From this point, he could see that with his lack of navigation knowledge, he forgot to bring a fishing rod on his own boat. It was enough for Ian that Uncle Hull gave him his fishing boat. Is it impossible that he prepared a fishing rod for him? However, when Ian went out to the sea, he didn't even think of it, and now he can't even catch a fish. By noon, Ian was so hungry that his eyes were almost green. He thought of a way to tie the katana that he brought out to a rope and throw it into the sea for fishing. However, how could a fish be hooked? The rope was so thick, and it had no hook or bait. How blind should the fish be to be caught by him? Ian didn't know if he was hungry or dizzy. He saw that the self-made fishing rod hasn't responded for half a day, then he woke up and slammed his head. How could I be so stupid? So he took off his clothes and pants and jumped into the sea with his katana. Without a fishing rod, he had to fish in his own way. Fortunately, Ian's lung capacity was sufficient, and he could still dive for a long time in the sea. You should be able to catch a fish, Ian thought so. But what Ian didn't realize was that just as he was diving, another ship appeared on the sea behind him. It was a very large ship, with a black pirate flag hanging on the mast and a round red-nosed skull on the pirate flag. Above the mast, a watchful sailor looked around with a binocular. Soon, he found Ian's boat on the sea. "Captain Buggy! There is a boat over there." The watcher immediately shouted down, "It's a fishing boat, but I don't know why there's nobody on board." On the lower deck, a man in a captain's cap and overcoat was sitting on a chair with his jaw pinched. This man was dressed as a clown with a big round red nose. That's right, this was a pirate ship, and that clown was their captain, the clown Buggy. Hearing the call of the watcher, he was stunned and said, "Nobody's on the boat? A shipwrecked? The storm last night was so fierce, maybe it's indeed that." A black-haired man riding a unicycle next to him said, crossing his hands. "Go personally, maybe you can find something worthwhile." Buggy waved, "We are the famous pirate group of robbers, even if it is a small fish, we don't let it go." "Yes. Captain Buggy." A crowd of pirates on deck immediately stood up and replied loudly. Soon, a small boat was laid down on the sea and sailed in the direction of Ian's boat. Ian did not know what was happening on the sea. He was still trying to catch a fish. Don't be ignorant, it is so difficult to catch fish in the sea, how can a human be faster than a fish in the sea? So even though the sea was full of fishes, Ian could not catch one. He can't hold on anymore, so he floated to the surface for some air, and then he will dive again. If people are extremely hungry, they can go all out to eat. So Ian showed up and dive again, he didn't even notice the coming boat with Buggy's pirates. Similarly, his figure was too small for the pirates on board to find him. So, several pirates got on Ian's boat, looked around, and found nothing. Finally, they took all his clothes and his hat back for Buggy. When Ian resurfaced again and returned to his boat, everything was gone, and he has nothing left. What the heck? Where are all my stuff? Is there anyone around? Ian looks around on who might possibly have taken all his stuff, and then he saw the ship of Buggy the clown. Buggy! That freaking clown, how dare they took all my stuff! Ian dropped the sail of his boat and headed for the ship. While Ian was getting closer to the pirate ship, a crewmate of Buggy saw him with his binoculars and shouted his presence to the captain. Captain Buggy! A small boat is following us. And there is a kid on it. A kid? How dare someone has the guts to follow us, the Buggy pirates? Aim all cannons and show him fear. No one shall dare not show fear in front of the great Buggy. Gya ha 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 ha. Ian saw the cannons and immediately understood what that Buggy was planning. He took out his brand new sword of the Blade Master and prepared to slice the cannonballs headed his way. The pirates began shooting the cannons headed for Ian's way. Ian concentrated full-heartedly and sliced all the cannonballs aimed right at him. The cannonballs split in a half and exploded at the side of his boat. Is that all you got, big-nosed? Give me back all my clothes and hat. Or I'll come and kill you all. Buggy got irritated. How dare you call me big-nosed? Bring out the Buggy balls. Let's see how this brat deal with this. Gya ha 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 ha. The pirate crew brought out the Buggy balls and loaded it to the cannon, aimed at Ian and shot out. When the cannonball was headed his way, Ian saw that it was different from all the others and brought out all of his strength to cut down the ball, but it was no use. As soon as his sword cut the cannonball to two, the ball exploded and destroyed Ian's boat. Ian was hit point blank and got dismembered to pieces from the explosion and died at sea. Chapter 24, Lucky Day. What the heck? My clothes? When Ian finally caught a big fish with a strange shape from the sea and climbed onto the boat, his eyes were about to come out. At first, he thought it was a naughty seabird who had taken his clothes, but when he saw the pirate ship of Buggy in the distance moving away, he immediately understood what was going on, and for a moment, he felt that he was robbed by a bunch of naughty monkeys. Damn it, I was unlucky enough to encounter a storm last night. Now pirates had stolen my things on this vast sea. Can this get any worse? When the fish was thrown into the boat, Ian grabbed the paddles and rowed towards the pirate ship in the distance. Far away, he had not yet seen who this pirate group was, but Ian was full of anger, because not only did they took his clothes, but also the hat that Uncle Kuma had given him and the den den mushi that he had put in his hat, all of which had been stolen. Without the den den mushi, how can he contact Zoro to ask about Kuina's situation? How can he feel comfortable without wearing his beloved hat? And without clothes, it would be even worse. Even if he landed, he could only run like a tribe man. I won't forgive you. Ian was about to blow up with anger. Using his utmost strength, the two paddles were spinning very fast. At this time, several pirates that were ordered to inspect Ian's boat. They had already boarded the pirate ship of Buggy. When they came up, Buggy asked them indifferently, "How was it? Is there any goods?" "Report, Captain Buggy." A man in a circus hat stood up and answered, "We've searched, there's no money, no treasure. There are only a few clothes and a hat on the boat." "Oh, yeah, there's a den den mushi in the hat." "Oh?" Buggy was somewhat surprised. In fact, he did not have a lot of expectations for the things in that boat. He just had an idea of checking the boat, so he sent some of his people there. Did they found something there? A den den mushi? This kind of thing is quite rare. I didn't expect that there would be such a thing on that boat. Show me. Buggy slumped down the chair. "Ah, all right." The pirate in the circus hat quickly handed Ian's cap over and flattered, "The den den mushi was inside of this round bear's ear hat." But before he had finished, Buggy suddenly said, "What did you say? Repeat it again." "The den den mushi was inside this round bear's ear hat," it was repeated so unclearly. Then Buggy was furious, one hand suddenly broke away from his body, flew over and grabbed the man's neck. He shouted, "Who do you say is a big round nose?" I haven't." The pirate was crying. He knew that his captain has turned a blind eye again. Because he cares about his round red nose, what he hates most is that others mock his nose. Once anyone mentions it, he will get so angry. Over time, he became so sensitive. All Buggy's pirates knew that their captain has prohibited using a sentence with these words, round, red, and big, not even words with similar meanings. But knowing that it's one thing and making mistakes is another thing. The pirate just thought that Ian's bear ear hat looked so cute that he couldn't help describing it, but what made Buggy angry was that he said that this bear ear was round. For an uneducated pirate, he could not find another adjective to replace the word round. Not been educated is terrible, without an education you will be punished. XD. Captain Buggy was so angry, and everyone under his hand dared to say those bad words. How could he maintain the captain's prestige without giving a lesson? So Buggy did not turn back and said, "Prepare the cannon." Ah! Ah! All right. The crowd shivered, they dare not disobey, and immediately agreed. The clown Buggy is actually very cold to people. The cannon execution is a reserved program on his pirate ship. His men have seen it many times, so although they are preparing in a panic, they are very skilled in their movements. For forgiveness. The man who was lifted into the air and his neck were twisted, could hardly breathe. He was desperately trying to break Buggy's hand. Maybe because he didn't think so much, he still had Ian's hat in his hand. Buggy saw the hat at that time, and he was stunned. The next moment, Buggy's hand loosened, and then he fell down and stared at his captain Buggy, wondering why he suddenly let go. Did he change his mind? Buggy did not pay attention to him. His hand flew over and picked up Ian's hat. Then it flew back and re-sticked into Buggy again. He took Ian's bear ear cap and said thoughtfully, "Hi. Strange, this hat, I seem to have seen it before." After that, Buggy seemed to think of something, turned around with this hat and rushed towards the cabin, leaving behind a crowd of people who looked at each other, wondering whether they should continue the execution. Captain Buggy was supposed to have lost his mind by ignoring them. Sitting on a one-wheeled bike, a man wearing a large blue and white checkered scarf that covers the lower portion of his face came over. He was the chief of staff of Buggy Pirates, Kabaji. The man with unique hairstyle, his hair covering his left eye, sullenly said, "Tie him up. The execution continues. This is Captain Buggy's will." "Hi, Chief." The other pirates responded quickly, tied up the unfortunate fellow, and hung him on the side of the boat. Then they moved over the cannon, aimed the muzzle at the hapless guy, lifted the torch, and watched as the fuse was about to ignite. At this time, a man jumped up from the side of the boat and landed on the deck with a loud bang. Everyone stared at the sudden appearance of the figure and found that he wasn't wearing clothes, only a pair of pants. The tribe-man body was wet, with black hair tied behind his head and a katana in his hand. Yeah, it was Ian. The person who was about to be executed was really lucky. For the first time, he was released from Buggy's hand. The second time he was about to be bombarded by the giant cannon, but when Ian got on the boat, everyone's attention was drawn, which kept him alive. Today must be his lucky day. Ignoring the tearful and grateful eyes of the suspended fellow, Ian jumped aboard the boat and shouted angrily, "Who stole my clothes and stuff? Stand up!" The men on the boat looked at each other, and they didn't know how to react to what was going on. Wasn't that boat empty? And he even dared to come to us. Watching the wet man, they all thought that he was afraid of them, and he had jumped into the sea. After a while, the reaction came over, one of them suddenly burst into laughter. "This man is really stupid." It was understandable that he was angry when someone has taken away his stuff, but he dared to catch up with him and ask for it. This was not what ordinary fools can describe. Didn't he look at how many people there are on their side, and how many people are on his side? Boy! Has no one taught you how does the pirate flag look like? Haha, that's ridiculous, you dare jump on the boat without seeing it. From the first glance, I knew that he's just a newcomer to the sea. Don't look at them when they were in front of Buggy because he makes them tremble, but when they were with outsiders, they showed what the evil pirates deserved, and they sneered at Ian fiercely. At this time, Ian actually saw the people on the boat. At first, he just felt a little puzzled. The pirates in front of him did not look like pirates at all, but more like a circus. What are they wearing? Hearing the jeers of the pirates, Ian looked unconsciously at the sail, and he was stunned when he saw the round red nose pattern. Chapter 25, Making Fun of Him? Is this really the ship of the Buggy Pirates? Looking at the bow, Ian found that the bow was an elephant, and the long nose was transformed into a cannon. There is no mistaking it. This was Buggy's pirate ship Big Top. Ian never thought that it was Buggy's pirates who have stolen his things. It was a great surprise. This was a bit difficult because Ian was very impressed with Buggy, not to mention his future achievements, say that when Buggy first came on the scene, he already has a bounty of 10 million berries. Ian went to sea earlier than Zoro, which was naturally earlier than Luffy. Now Buggy's reward wasn't known, but it should not be too low. Because there was no clear understanding of his own strength, Ian doesn't know whether he can beat Buggy. At other times, Ian may temporarily avoid it, but not at present. His clothes, hat and dendenmushi must be brought back. Ian kept thinking and did not speak, making Buggy pirates believes that Ian was frightened of them, so they took out their weapons one by one and leaned over Ian with a grin. Boy! Now that you're here, don't move. Put down your weapon and wait for Captain Buggy to come out. Haha, if the great Captain Buggy is in a good mood, maybe you will be a low-level boatman on the boat, and help us by scrubbing the deck every day. What if the captain is in a bad mood? Haha, that would be terrible. He might be used to replace the unlucky one that was hoisted. The cannon will be fired at that time. Boom. A group of pirates talked recklessly about Ian's fate but did not see Ian's face getting worse and worse. At this time, finally, a pirate could not hold back. He raised his western sword in his hand and smashed it toward Ian, trying to injure him and then tie him up. Ian stood still and watched the sword coming toward his shoulder. Just when everyone thought he was frightened and didn't know how to resist, Ian suddenly moved. With a one-side move avoiding the slashing of the pirate, Ian slipped behind him, and the katana in his hand came out of its sheath in an instant. Accompanied by the bright light of the sword, he slashed him down. The pirate burst into a scream, and Ian cut a large wound on his back. The blood gushed out and fell on the ground. However, it wasn't over yet. After Ian chopped down the man with one blow, his body moved again at a very fast speed. He shuttled among the group of pirates. Every time he switched his position, he would be accompanied by a snow-shining sword light, either chopping or cutting or stabbing or smashing. Each action was different. The same was that every time the katana flashed, there would be a pirate screaming and falling down. After waiting for the 8 or 9 clowns who surrounded him were smashed to the ground, and Ian's body movement finally ended. At the moment when his figure stopped, Ian's katana just returned to the sheath. Whew! Perfect! Although they were only minions, but the number of enemies was too much, and he was alone. So it is not good to be surrounded. So when Ian came up, he used his strongest sword skills, chain flash. This trick is worthy of the advanced swordsmanship. It is very important to talk about the connection between the attacking actions. When chopping down the first opponent, he must have the intention of attacking the next opponent at the same time. Meanwhile, he must make a gesture in action. Otherwise, we will not be able to continue and will be interrupted halfway. Ian practiced it in Frost Moon Village for a long time before he finally mastered it. The advantage of this trick is that the power of the nin in one application can be divided into several parts for continuous use, rather than consuming one nin point per hit. Most importantly, it's a great skill to fight these huge numbers of pirates. The rest of the pirates were still in the distance, he wasn't surrounded by them. At this time, there was no reaction at all. They stared at Ian, who was still in the position of sheathing the sword. They did not know what expression to express their surprise and astonishment. Originally thought to be a lonely rookie who wandered alone at sea, how in the twinkling of an eye, he became such a murderous demon. His expression has changed too fast? Ian did not know what the pirates thought. After seeing so much blood for the first time, he did not feel nausea and vomiting as often described in the novels. Instead, he had a faint excitement, which was a sign of his adrenaline surge. He found himself seemingly comfortable with the battle. Of course, the pirates lying on the ground, Ian actually did not kill them, but they were seriously injured. He did not attack the vital parts of these pirates, the most use of the nin was held on his own body, not entangled in his katana. The power of the attack was relatively small. If these pirates were treated in time, they would not die. After all, he hasn't really reached the point of killing people without blinking an eye. But the other pirates didn't know. They thought their companions lying on the ground had been killed by him. When they came back, they immediately shouted angrily. Ha! Kill him! You offended the buggy pirates, you're going to die. However, after a long time of shouting, no one dared really to rush up. Just now, Ian smashed over 8 pirates, and the others were frightened. Just thinking about it, they realized that they were not Ian's opponents. So when they shouted, their eyes unconsciously started swaying to the side of Chief of Staff, Kabeji, counting on him to come forward. Kabeji was sitting on his unicycle with his arms crossed, his mouth hidden in his blue and white checked scarf. They could not see what his expression was, but with a little closer observation, it would show the haze in his eyes. He had not spoken since Ian jumped on the ship, but the difference was that at the beginning, he felt too lazy to take care of him. He thought that Ian was a rookie, so let his men teach him a lesson, but even now he is not speaking. After seeing Ian's actions of chopping his crew, he found that he was not sure to defeat him. He can't help it. When Ian used the chain flash, it seemed that he was moving too fast. Just as Kabeji hesitated to make a move, he suddenly heard a huge lion roar. The sound came from the back of the ship. Ian heard it and looked at it. He saw a man riding a lion and slowly walked out. What's the matter? Why is there such a bloody smell? Aren't you afraid to stimulate Richie? As soon as he came out, he said unhappily. When he saw this man, Ian burst into laughter, pointed at him, and said, "Haha! Your hat is stranger than mine." The person who just appeared was wearing a circle of fur on his head, and it was even wrapped around his cheeks, looked like a sheep with wool all over his head. And the lion under him, the mane on the top of its head was actually combed into a long hair, erected straight, looked so stupid. That's rude. This is my hair. Hearing Ian's laughter, the lion rider was furious, and the blue veins were coming out of his forehead. Anyone whose hair was treated as a fur hat would be angry. But after the roar, he reacted and asked Ian doubtfully, "Who are you? Why are you on our ship?" This was naturally the deputy captain of the buggy pirates, the beast tamer Moji. There are so many strange people in the world of One Piece. Ian looked at his fur-like hair and suddenly thought of it. Is he from a furry family? If so, which family would he be? Sheep family? Just as Ian's brain opens wide, Moji finally saw the pirates lying on the deck in the pool of blood, and suddenly reacted to what was going on. The naked boy in front of him was an intruder. You have so much guts that you dare to come up to our ship, and provoke us. Moji gritted his teeth and said to Ian. Puff, fart. Ian couldn't carry on any more. It's clear that you stole my things, even dare to say that I am provocative. Moji didn't care much. He was the deputy captain. If he had let go of Ian at this time, then he wouldn't need to join in with Kabeji. So he ignored the rebuttal of Ian and patted the lion Richie, and said, "Kill him." The lion Richie made another loud roar, jumped up toward Ian with Moji on his back, and swung its claws sharply toward Ian. Ian saw its claws coming fiercely, and he was ready for it. He quickly stepped back and dodged the claw. He felt a gust of wind blowing in front of him and could not help but sweat slightly. He wasn't afraid to fight the pirates, but this was his first time confronting with a beast like a lion. When he missed, Richie attacked Ian again. The lion is a fierce beast, attacks its prey much faster than the human being. Ian was in a hurry and could only use the sheath of the sword to resist the blow. What surprises him, however, was that Richie had bitten his sword and broke it into 2 pieces. Ian was stunned and stared at the remaining handle in his hand. For a while, he could not respond. He did not expect the low-quality samurai sword he brought out to last long, but he never thought that it would break so quickly. Don't underestimate Richie's biting power. Moji crossed his hands and looked down at Ian. Richie is a terrible beast. Many people lost their lives in his mouth. As a result, his words were still coming, and Richie stopped suddenly, lowered his head and sniffed Ian's broken blade. Then the next second, he stretched out his tongue and licked the broken blade. Ian looked silently at the lion Richie licking things like a big dog. When he was diving in the sea, he used the sword to catch some fishes. So there was still a fishy smell on the blade. It was estimated that after he smelled the fishy smell, he felt that he should have a meal. Though he did not want to say it, he couldn't help opening his mouth and saying, "Are you really a pirate? How can you look more like a circus?"